Hello there, and welcome to BoneAge. My name is Thomas. Tonight, let's wander back through time, not thousands of years, not even tens of thousands, but nearly 1,000,000. A place where the earth was colder, harsher, and wilder than anything we can imagine today. A place where our ancestors stood on the knife's edge of existence, because hidden deep in our DNA is a secret, a memory written in the code of life itself. Scientists call it a bottleneck, but what it really means is this. There was a time when humanity almost vanished, not most of us, not many of us, almost all of us. For nearly 200,000 years, our kind dwindled to just a thread of survival, perhaps only a few thousand scattered individuals at any given time. Think about that. The entire human story balanced on the fragile breath of so few. And yet, we are here. Every one of us alive today descends from those survivors, from that small cluster of beating hearts, who endured when the odds were impossible. This is the story of how humanity clung to life when extinction seemed almost certain. But before we begin our long journey through that ancient winter of existence, I'd like to invite you to pause with me. If you enjoy drifting into these forgotten worlds, let your mind sink into the stillness, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It helps other wanderers find their way here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it for you? The comments are like a constellation, with voices from across the globe glowing all at once. So settle in, let the weight of the day fall away. Imagine the stars above an ancient sky, sharper and colder than the ones we know. Imagine walking barefoot across the dust of a world almost empty of people, where silence stretched for miles and every fire mattered. Because that is where our story begins, with a mystery hidden in our very bones. And to uncover it, we have to step into the long shadow of a time when humanity almost disappeared. The air feels thin when you imagine it, a world where silence stretched for miles, where the number of humans could be counted not in millions, not in thousands, but perhaps only in hundreds. You stand at the edge of a dry savanna, the scent of dust and wind mixing, and the thought presses down on you that if you walked to the horizon, you might not find another soul at all. This is the place our story begins. Not with abundance, but with near absence. Modern humans, compared to our closest relatives, are strangely alike. Chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans, even though they live in scattered pockets of forest and swamps, carry a vast wealth of genetic variety. Across their small numbers, each population is unique, carrying its own subtle adaptations. But in us that richness is missing. Despite our billions, our genetic diversity is thin, almost eerily so, as though someone swept away most of what once was and left only a narrow set of possibilities behind. When scientists first noticed this, it was not a gentle anomaly, it was a startling scar in the very code of life. It spoke of catastrophe. It whispered of collapse. It was in the late 20th century that researchers began to notice the pattern, peering into our DNA with the growing tools of molecular biology. They expected to find the wide spread of variation that any healthy large species should carry. Instead, they found uniformity. The differences between people on opposite sides of the planet were less than the differences between neighboring groups of chimpanzees. For a species spread across the world, this was not just unusual. It was almost impossible. Something must have happened, something that had compressed humanity down to a tiny fraction of its potential. The answer came slowly, like shadows sharpening as the sun falls. New models allowed scientists to trace mutations backward, using DNA as a kind of clock. And what the clock revealed was staggering. Between 900 and 800,000 years ago, Our ancestors suffered a collapse so severe that almost all of them vanished for nearly 200,000 years, longer than all of written history combined. The human lineage survived as a handful of scattered bands. The estimates are sobering, perhaps no more than 1,000 or two breeding individuals on the entire Earth. Imagine a world where everyone alive could fit inside a single small town. That is how narrow the thread of survival became. Close your eyes and picture it. A small fire crackling in a clearing, its glow a fragile bubble against the darkness. Around it a dozen figures sit, thin and watchful, listening to the distant roars of predators that own the night. Every cough of sickness matters. Every lost child is not only grief, but a subtraction that could tip the balance towards disappearance. These were not people secure in their future. They were survivors clinging to existence, generation after generation, with no sense that the species itself teetered on a cliff's edge. Why did this happen? The Earth itself was shifting in ways that made survival nearly impossible. Around 900,000 years ago, the planet's climate rhythm broke. Ice ages, once arriving in regular 40,000-year cycles, lengthened into brutal 100,000-year winters. Glaciers expanded like continents of ice. Rain patterns shifted. Forests vanished into desert. Lakes dried to dust. Picture walking through land where your grandparents knew trees, but where your eyes see only cracked earth and skeletal branches. For those who depended on animals and plants, this collapse of ecosystems was not abstract. It was starvation, thirst, and the end of home. The genetic signal of this collapse is written inside us like a scar that never healed. Every human today carries it. One of the most striking traces lies in our chromosomes. At some point in this narrow window of near extinction, two ancestral chromosomes fused, joining together into what we now call chromosome 2. Our great ape cousins have 48 chromosomes. We have 46. That difference is not cosmetic. It is a marker of history, a literal seam inside us that testifies to survival. In a population of millions, such a mutation would have been diluted, lost in the tide of diversity. But in a population of hundreds, it could spread quickly until every survivor carried it. Today, every human on Earth shares this fusion. Scientists can point to the exact molecular scar where two strands became one, a stitch in the fabric of our being that ties us back to a moment when we almost ceased to exist. Some researchers even wonder if that fusion played a role in shaping the human brain, because genes near the fusion site are linked to neural development. It is possible, just possible, that our intelligence, our capacity for language, for memory, for imagination was born not in a time of triumph, but in an era of desperation, that in the crucible of near extinction, chance and survival conspired to make us what we are. Think of DNA as a library, every mutation, every variation, a book waiting to be read. In most species, the shelves grow with time, but for us a fire swept through, leaving only a small cluster of volumes intact. Countless genetic possibilities are gone forever. Perhaps traits that might have made us resistant to certain diseases or variations that might have shaped our appearance were erased. What remains is what survived, and what survived became us. It is why two strangers across oceans can share more in common than neighboring chimpanzee troops. It is why humanity, for all its cultural differences, is biologically one of the most unified species on Earth. That unity came at a price. Scientists speak of the extinction vortex, the peril that comes when populations fall too low. Numbers shrink, inbreeding grows, fertility declines, and the chance of random catastrophe increases. Most species caught in this spiral do not escape. They vanish. That humanity did not is one of the great improbabilities of natural history. For 117,000 years, longer than Homo sapiens has even existed as a species, our ancestors balanced on this knife's edge, long enough for glaciers to advance and retreat, long enough for continents to change their outlines, long enough for entire lineages of animals to rise and fall. Through it all, a few thousand humans, perhaps fewer, endured. Imagine the fragility of that existence. A single drought too long could have ended us. A volcanic eruption in the wrong valley. A predator raid at the wrong moment. A disease carried by chance. Any one of these could have severed the thread. And yet the thread held. Fires were kept alive. Children were born. Generations passed their knowledge forward, how to find water, how to use stone, how to keep fire burning when storms tried to smother it. The fact that you are here now, breathing, listening, means they succeeded. There is awe in that thought, that our very breath is borrowed from those who endured when survival should not have been possible. Every human heartbeat is a drum echoing from a time when the species nearly disappeared into silence. We often think of ourselves as inevitable, as though the arc of humanity was destined to stretch forward. But the truth written in our genes tells another story, one of fragility, chance, and survival against odds, so long they bended the imagination. If you pause for a moment and press your hand against your chest, you can almost feel it, the inheritance of endurance, the memory locked in bone and blood. You are the descendant of a few, the outcome of a trial by ice, hunger, and time. The world we know today, with its billions of voices and endless lights, grew from a spark that by all logic should have gone out, and yet it did not. Against silence, against cold, against time itself, the flame was carried forward. To understand why and to glimpse how that fragile spark survived, we have to look beyond the genes themselves, out into the world that shaped them, a planet remade by climate, testing the limits of what it meant to be human. The air of the mid-Pleistocene would not have felt gentle. It carried a raw edge, a shifting chill that sank into the lungs, reminding every living thing that the world itself had turned uncertain. Imagine waking to a sky clouded by ash-gray light, the horizon veiled by winds carrying the taste of dust. To the north, glaciers crept forward, mile-thick rivers of ice grinding mountains into rubble. To the south, deserts widened their grip, swallowing forests and rivers, leaving cracked earth where water once shimmered. It was a time when the planet's balance faltered, and for humans caught in the middle, survival meant listening not to the comforts of abundance, but to the rhythms of scarcity. The mid-Pleistocene transition began around 900,000 years ago, a subtle shift at first, but one that soon grew relentless. Before, Earth had followed shorter, gentler ice ages, cooling and warming in regular intervals. Now the pattern lengthened and deepened, plunging the planet into cold periods that stretched across 100,000 years. Glaciers advanced far into Europe and Asia, spreading their silence across valleys and plains, burying everything beneath white. When the ice retreated, it did not return the world as it was. Rainfall patterns broke, lakes shrank, grasslands turned brittle, trees withered into skeletal groves. If you stood in Africa during this time, you would have seen landscapes dying in stages. Rivers that once teemed with hippos and crocodiles trickled into mud. The air grew dry, carrying the faint scent of scorched earth. Herds of antelope and elephant would have thinned, forced to wander vast distances to find grazing. The soil cracked under bare feet, and each horizon promised less than the one before. To To live here meant to move constantly, never certain if the next valley would hold food or only bones. For early humans, these changes were not background. They were the central fact of existence. A single failed season of rain could mean famine. The disappearance of one herd could leave entire groups on the brink. Even the sound of night changed. Where once you might have heard frogs singing in marshland, there was silence. Where once there were rustling canopies alive with birds, only the wind whispered. Scarcity became the texture of life. Fires were lit not in celebration, but in defense against the creeping cold. Children grew up in a world where hunger was not a stranger, but a companion, where migration was constant, and where the horizon was less a promise of new lands than a gamble for survival. Imagine walking for weeks with no surety of water, the air burning dry in your throat, the ground hard as stone beneath aching feet. At night, lying on the earth, you might have stared at stars so sharp in the thin cold air that they seemed close enough to touch, and wondered if there would be food when the sun rose again. In such a world, ecosystems broke too quickly for animals to adapt. Species that once flourished vanished from the record, unable to survive in landscapes that shifted between extremes. Grasslands turned to deserts, then flooded in sudden storms. Forests collapsed only to regrow briefly before drought consumed them again. Humans were not outside this rhythm. They were inside it, buffeted by each shift, forced to become wanderers, not by choice, but by necessity. Every journey carried risk. A lake might have offered abundance one year, and a cracked basin the next. A valley filled with herds might, within a lifetime, become barren ground, where bones whitened under the sun. Even the seas carried the marks of change. With so much water locked into glaciers, sea levels dropped, exposing vast stretches of coastline that quickly dried. Shellfish beds disappeared. Rivers that had once spilled into wide estuaries shrank into narrow trickles. The air itself shifted. Winds swept harder across open plains, carrying dust storms that scoured skin and blinded eyes. These storms could roll for miles, cloaking the world in a haze that made even midday feel like twilight. The harshness of the mid-Pleistocene was not only in its cold, but in its unpredictability. Short warm periods returned, but they were unstable. Imagine a world where a few decades of abundance might tempt growth and hope, only to collapse into another glacial stretch that strangled life again. To be born in such a time was to learn quickly not to trust stability. The earth gave, and the earth took back, and every band of humans lived under that truth. The pressure shaped behavior. Small groups huddled together for warmth and protection, and migration became the rhythm of existence. Fires carried embers across valleys, and footprints stretched along shorelines where desperate foraging left traces in the sand. The memory of where water had been became knowledge more valuable than any tool. The smell of rain on the air could send entire families walking in its direction, chasing hope. The landscape pressed survival into the body itself. Skin cracked in the dry winds, muscles ached from endless travel, and the stomach grew accustomed to emptiness. Hands touched the soil to test its moisture. Eyes scanned the sky for changes in cloud and light. Every sense was attuned to the environment, because missing the faintest sign could mean death. The cry of a distant animal, the greening of a distant patch of earth, the sudden stillness of birds, all were messages. To live was to listen. For humans, these centuries were not about thriving, but about enduring. Families knew loss as constant. Infants did not always see adulthood. Elders were rare. A single season could break a lineage. Yet within this long, cold crucible, humanity learned to bend without breaking, Movement became instinct. Adaptability became a way of thought. Where food sources collapsed, new ones were sought. Where habitats failed, new ones were entered, even if strange and hostile. The earth seemed determined to test resilience, and for 200,000 years it did so without pause. Imagine generation after generation born into scarcity, each believing this was the natural order of life. No one could have known they were living through a bottleneck, a narrowing of history so severe that it nearly erased us. To them, there was only the cold, the hunger, and the fragile firelight holding back the night. If you stood there now, barefoot on cracked soil under a pale, heavy sky, you would feel it, the immensity of a planet shifting beneath your feet, the weight of survival pressing into every breath. The mid-Pleistocene was not gentle, not forgiving. It was a world of endless tests, and yet somehow, through cycles of drought and ice, dust storms and famine, the fragile human thread held. The world of the mid-Pleistocene was a planet of narrowing choices. Forests faded into desert, rivers shrank into shadows of their former selves, and the ice crept steadily outward like a silent tide. In such a landscape, most life withered away, but scattered across the earth, hidden like oases in a vast wilderness, were places where water lingered, where food could still be gathered, where the thread of survival might hold. Archaeologists and geneticists call them refugia, havens carved not by kindness but by accident, small fragments of stability in a world that was anything but stable. Imagine a coastal inlet in South Africa, where the sea air carried the smell of salt and kelp, and the rocks at low tide revealed pools alive with shellfish. In an age when land animals dwindled and plants shriveled, this shoreline offered something more dependable. The sea did not vanish with drought, and shellfish could be gathered year-round. The sound of waves, steady and rhythmic, might have been as comforting as the flicker of firelight, promising nourishment in a world of uncertainty. For the humans who reached these shores, the ocean was not just a boundary, it was a refuge, a partner in survival. Far inland, the story was different but no less fragile. In the Rift Valley of East Africa, lakes deep within the earth's fractures clung to existence. Rainfall still fed them from highlands where clouds gathered against mountain slopes. The air there would have carried the smell of damp soil and grasses, and the surface of the water would have glittered against an otherwise arid plain. These lakes were not simply waterholes, they were life itself. Around them, plants held on, animals lingered, and humans found the last green edges of a shrinking world. Picture small groups gathering at such lakes, their camps ringed by the sound of frogs and the calls of water birds, sounds rare in the dryness beyond. The children would have dipped their hands into the cool water, their laughter carrying lightly against the hush of wind. For their parents, this was not play but reprieve, the thin line between hunger and survival. Without these lakes, without these oases, the bottleneck might have closed completely, and the human story ended there. Refugia were scattered, not plentiful. A pocket here, a coastline there, an island of green in an ocean of dust. They could never support millions, only a few families at a time, perhaps dozens at most. Each refugee was a candle flame in the dark, flickering against winds that could extinguish it at any moment. A single volcanic eruption could smother a valley in ash. A drought a few years too long could drain a lake. A shift in animal migration could empty a coastline. Humanity's existence balanced on these fragile places, each one holding only enough space for a scattering of lives. The image is haunting when you think of it. Entire continents largely empty of people, vast stretches of land where no human footprint could be found for centuries. And then, tucked into corners, these tiny hearths of survival, a fire crackling in a coastal cave, a camp beneath acacia trees beside a shrinking lake. The smoke from those fires rose into skies that were otherwise devoid of human trace, a faint whisper of persistence on a planet that seemed determined to erase us. Genetics tells us that all modern humans descend from those few who found and held onto such refuges. Every line of ancestry we carry was funneled through these isolated populations, and yet the refugia were not permanent homes in the way we think of home. They were places of pause, temporary sanctuaries in a world that demanded movement. A coastline might provide shellfish, but storms could strip it bare. A lake might offer water, but its level might fall within a single generation. To survive, people moved between refuges, following memory and hope, their paths tracing across valleys and shorelines like faint threads of a web. Think of what it must have been like to travel between them, walking through dust-laden air, the sun sharp above, the ground littered with bones of animals that had failed the test of climate, the sound of footsteps muffled by dry soil, the horizon shimmering with heat, nights spent under skies where the stars felt closer than breath, the cold air biting through thin hides pulled around the body. Each step was a gamble, a wager that somewhere ahead lay water, that a green place still lingered, that the knowledge passed down from elders was true. The refuge shaped not just survival, but behavior. Living in small, isolated groups meant cooperation was essential. No one could afford to live alone. Fire was shared, food was divided, children were raised collectively. Within these circles, social bonds grew tight, and knowledge was preserved with care. The memory of where to find shellfish, the signs of when a lake would refill, the plants that could heal, these were lifelines passed across generations. In the fragility of refugia, culture became as important as tools, and yet these sanctuaries were precarious. A single accident could erase a group, a flood, a predator's ambush, an epidemic spreading through a small population. Any of these could wipe out a line entirely. When you realize this, it becomes clear how unlikely our survival was. Humanity was not spread across the world in comfort. It was scattered, fragile, clinging to a handful of places that the earth had spared by chance. Still, it was enough. The spark endured, carried from one pocket to another, flickering but never fully extinguished. And as long as it burned, even faintly, the possibility of the future remained. The coastal shells cracked open by ancient hands, the footprints left in mud by children near Rift Valley lakes, the faint traces of hearths discovered in caves. These are not just artifacts. They are proof that even in the most brutal conditions, life found a way. When you close your eyes, you can almost stand there, the air cool and damp beside the lake, the smell of fish and reeds rising from the shore, the voices of a small group carried softly on the wind, their laughter and murmurs blending with the sounds of birds returning to roost. Beyond that circle of sound, silence stretched for miles, a silence filled not with peace, but with the absence of others. Yet within that small circle, humanity endured. Every one of us alive today carries the memory of these refugees in our genes, though we cannot recall them directly. They are the shadows beneath our similarities, the reason we share so much across oceans and continents. They are the reason we exist at all. And while the earth closed its hand around nearly every possibility, it left these small openings, these pockets of safety. That is where the story of survival found its foothold. That is where the spark of our kind was shielded, however briefly, from the storm. The nights of the mid-Pleistocene would not have been silent. They would have trembled with sound, the low growl of lions moving unseen in the tall grass, the high laughter of hyenas echoing under the moon, the splash of crocodiles waiting at the edges of shrinking rivers. For early humans, the darkness was not only a place of rest, it was a theater of danger, filled with eyes that glowed in the firelight and muscles coiled in silence. We were not yet the rulers of this world. Far from it. Humanity walked among predators whose size, strength, and weapons of tooth and claw placed us firmly in the role of prey. Saber-toothed cats prowled with canines the length of daggers. Giant hyenas, larger and stronger than their modern relatives, hunted in packs that could bring down almost anything. Crocodiles, ancient and patient, lay in wait where thirst drove humans to drink. Even leopards and lions, creatures we know today, were larger, more powerful, and far more daring in their pursuit. Imagine crouching at the edge of a fire, its heat against your skin, the smell of smoke rising sharp in the cool air. Beyond the circle of light, grass shifts. The sound is small but enough to freeze the body. A shadow moves, low and deliberate. You know it could be a lion, eyes fixed on the flicker of movement, waiting for the right moment to strike. In such a world, every sense mattered. The crack of a twig, the silence of birds, even the direction of the wind against your cheek. These were signals of life or death. Fossils tell us that humans often lost these encounters. Bones from this era carry the marks of teeth, punctures in skulls and limbs that match the jaws of predators. Some were scavenged, others clearly hunted. To be human in this age was not to be the hunter at the top of the chain, but the pursued, moving through landscapes dominated by creatures designed for killing. And the cost of each loss was devastating. A single ambush could erase an entire family line. When your population numbers in millions, a death is absorbed. But when your kind is reduced to scattered bands of dozens, each life carries the weight of survival. To lose a hunter was to lose a source of food. To lose a mother was to lose children yet unborn. To lose even one elder was to lose memories of where water lay, of which plants could heal, of which valleys held danger. Predation shaped not only the body, but the mind. Humans learned to be cautious, to move in groups, to listen to silence as much as to sound. Fires were not only for warmth, they were barriers, fragile walls of flame against the encroaching dark. In many groups, keeping the fire alive would have been a sacred duty, because to let it die was to invite the predators in. The smell of smoke on the air may have been as reassuring as the taste of food, a sign that the night would not swallow you whole. Picture a riverbank under starlight. The water glimmers, and thirst drives the group toward it, but no crocodiles wait there. Jaws hidden beneath the surface, so they approach slowly, stones in hand, hearts racing. The splash of a fish is enough to send them retreating into the brush, because one wrong step could mean the sudden clamp of teeth, the drag into black water. In such moments, survival meant restraint. It meant learning not to challenge the predators, but to outlast them, to move where they did not linger, to drink where the shadows were fewer. Even the daylight was not safe. The golden light of morning carried with it the risks of ambush. Saber-toothed cats were ambush hunters, striking from cover with explosive speed. The giant hyena could crack bone with a single bite, its laughter in the distance a warning of its approach. Imagine traveling across open plains, the sun beating down, the ground warm underfoot, and knowing that behind any rise or bush, something stronger, faster, deadlier might wait. The air itself must have felt heavy with vigilance, every horizon a question, every step a risk. Predators did not only kill, they taught. They forced humans to cooperate more tightly, to share watch duties, to move carefully at night, to carry fire wherever possible. They taught us the value of silence, the need for signaling, the wisdom of staying close together. They may even have shaped our capacity for storytelling. Around the fire, warnings about where the lions hunted, where crocodiles lurked, where hyenas had been heard. These were not idle tales, but instructions for survival. Stories were maps of danger, carved into memory, passed from one generation to the next. In this way, predators were more than enemies. They were the harsh teachers of resilience. By living alongside them, humans learned to adapt in ways no other prey animal could. We were slower than cats, weaker than hyenas, smaller than many of the beasts we feared, but we could plan, we could remember, we could pass knowledge forward. In the long game of survival, these traits mattered more than muscle or fang, but the lessons were costly. Archaeological sites reveal evidence of humans killed by predators and dragged into their lairs, bones gnawed and scattered. In small groups, such losses were catastrophic. A band reduced by half might not recover. A child taken was not only grief, but the loss of all the future that child might have carried. The fragility of our numbers meant that every roar in the night was a reminder of how narrow the margin was. It is humbling to imagine our ancestors in such a position, not as lords of the earth, but as one among many creatures pressed low on the ladder of power. The image of humans as inevitable dominators of the planet is a modern one. For most of our history, we were fragile, vulnerable, and at constant risk. The great predators ruled the land. We were survivors in their shadows, learning slowly, cautiously, to carve out space for ourselves. Think of the wind at night, cool and sharp, carrying the scent of fire, smoke and animal musk. Think of eyes glowing just beyond the circle of flame, watching, waiting. Think of the way a group might huddle close, voices low, ears straining for the snap of grass beneath a padded paw. This was the world of the mid-Pleistocene, a world where humanity survived not by conquering predators, but by avoiding them, respecting them, and learning, always learning, from the threats they posed. It was not a world of certainty, nor of dominance. It was a world of fragile endurance. And yet, against odds written in tooth and claw, humanity endured. The story of our species has never been one of solitude. Long before Homo sapiens stepped fully into the world, the earth was home to a family of humans, cousins, ancestors, near relatives, each carving out their own existence in landscapes that shifted with ice, drought, and fire. Imagine a dawn on that distant earth, the sky painted soft red, the air cool with the breath of night, the ground still damp with dew. Across the plain, figures move. Some look like us, their posture upright, their eyes keen. Others are heavier, broader, with different rhythms to their walk, different fires burning in their minds. This was not a world of one humanity, but of many, sharing the same sun, the same winds, the same precarious fate. For over 1 million years, Homo erectus had thrived. They were wanderers, the first humans to step beyond Africa, their footprints pressed into the soil of Asia and Europe long before sapiens ever arrived. Their tools, simple yet enduring, tell us they mastered survival in ways that carried them across continents. The smoke of their fires once rose beside rivers in Java, their shadows cast in caves from China to the Caucasus. If you could stand beside them, the air heavy with the smell of burning wood and roasted marrow, you would recognize something deeply familiar. Hands shaping stone, eyes fixed on flame, families gathered against the dark. For 1 million years they endured, longer than any other human species has ever managed. But even their long dominance was tested by the harsh climate of the Bottleneck. as habitats shrank, the once vast ranges of Homo erectus fractured into scattered enclaves. The air grew thinner with silence where their voices once echoed, and the bones they left behind tell us their numbers dwindled. In the long cold shadow of the mid-Pleistocene, even the most resilient human lineages faltered. At the same time, new forms of humanity emerged. In Europe, heavy-browed Neanderthals took shape, their bodies built for cold, their chests broad, their limbs thick, their lungs pulling in icy air with every breath. In Asia, Denisovans, known to us only through fragments of bone and the whispers of DNA, adapted to mountains and forests, their legacy still flowing in the blood of modern people in Tibet, Melanesia, and beyond. These cousins were not shadows. They were real, breathing, thriving beings, sharing the earth with us, learning, adapting, struggling, and in some places flourishing. The world must have felt crowded in strange ways, not crowded with numbers, for humans of all kinds were few compared to today, but crowded with presence. Imagine traveling across a ridge, the wind sharp on your face, only to see smoke rising in the valley below. Not the smoke of a wildfire, but of a hearth tended by hands like yours, though belonging to others not quite the same. Their tools might look familiar, their faces recognizable, yet marked by differences that set them apart. Did they speak? Did they laugh? Did they fear us as we feared them? Or did they greet us with curiosity, drawn by the same hunger for connection? Competition was inevitable. In a world where waterholes dried and animals grew scarce, two groups of humans meeting at the same resource faced a decision: share, fight, or flee. Fossil sites hinted conflict, skulls cracked by blows, bones fractured not by accident but by intent. In the thin margins of survival, a clash between cousins could mean everything. A single victory might feed your group, a single defeat might end your bloodline. The air in such encounters would have been taut with tension, the silence between words sharper than any spear. And yet, not all meetings ended in violence. Our DNA tells a more complex story, one of intermingling, of unions across boundaries. In the code of modern humans lies the imprint of Neanderthals and Denisovans, threads of their existence woven into our own. Imagine the firelight reflecting in two sets of eyes, the air carrying the mingled scent of sweat, smoke, and earth. Bonds may have formed, children born, lineages blending. These connections were fragile, fleeting perhaps, but they left echoes strong enough to endure to this day. In the high altitudes of Tibet, where oxygen thins and the air chills the lungs, Denisovan genes help modern humans breathe. In the immune systems of many, Neanderthal inheritance strengthens resistance. Even in our most intimate biology, the cousins we once lived beside have not vanished entirely, but for most the story was harsher. The bottleneck was not just a filter of genetics, but of existence itself. Lineages dwindled. Some faded slowly, their numbers shrinking with each generation, their last voices carried away by the wind. Others ended abruptly, extinguished by famine, by predators, by conflict, by sheer chance. To walk the earth then was to share it with other humans, and to watch them vanish one by one. What must it have felt like to witness their decline? Perhaps there was grief, a recognition of kinship even across differences. Perhaps there was relief, the knowledge that one less rival remained in a world of scarcity. Or perhaps it was something quieter, a passing without notice, as small groups lost touch and never met again. Silence grew in the places where cousins once lived, and in that silence our lineage pressed forward, carrying the spark alone. It is tempting to imagine a world of inevitable conquest, where sapiens rose because we were destined to. But the truth is softer, stranger. Our survival was not certain. It was a roll of the evolutionary dice. Neanderthals, with their intelligence and strength, might have endured in our place. Denisovans, with their adaptability, might have carried the torch. Even Homo erectus, with their million-year legacy, might have continued. But they did not. We did, and the reasons remain only partially clear. Perhaps we were more adaptable, able to live on shellfish when herds disappeared, able to wander farther when rivers dried. Perhaps our social bonds were tighter, our communication more nuanced, our stories stronger in binding us together. Or perhaps it was luck, a chance alignment of refuge and resource, of survival through storms that others could not endure. The truth, like the wind that shaped the dunes, is a mixture of all these forces, but the outcome is written in stone and in bone. We survived, they vanished. The fires of Neanderthals went cold in their caves. The Denisovans left only fragments in the soil of Siberia. Homo erectus, who had walked the earth for longer than any of us, faded into silence. And yet, not all was lost. Their blood mingles in ours, their lessons echo in the tools we use, their shadows flicker in the recesses of memory we cannot name. Close your eyes and breathe. The air you draw in carries the same oxygen they once breathed, the same winds that swept over their fires, the same clouds that drifted above their valleys. The earth holds their absence, but within you, their presence lingers. Every human alive is a mosaic, carrying whispers of cousins whose names we only partly remember. In this way, the bottleneck was more than a test of survival. It was a narrowing of humanity itself, a brutal contest in which entire branches of our family tree broke away and fell. What remains is us, not because we were destined, but because we endured, and because chance allowed us to. And in that endurance, in that improbable survival, the path of our species was set, even as the world around us continued to shift and challenge us at every turn. On nights when the wind howled across the plains and shadows gathered thick in the grass, fire was the thin line between safety and annihilation. Picture a small circle of early humans, their bodies curled close, the smell of smoke heavy in their hair, the warmth flickering across tired faces. Beyond the glow, the darkness was alive with sound, the cough of a lion, the distant scream of a hyena, the quiet shifting of unseen creatures moving under the cover of night. The fire crackled, spitting sparks into the air, its light painting the rocks and the bodies of the living with trembling gold. It was not only warmth, it was not only light, it was life. Archaeological traces suggest humans had learned to harness fire perhaps 1 million years ago, but during the long centuries of the bottleneck, fire was no longer a luxury of survival. It was survival itself. In a world where predators ruled the night and the cold seeped deep into bone, fire stretched the day, held back the beasts, and transformed what could be eaten into what could nourish. The flames broke open marrow, softened roots, seared meat, and rendered the inedible into sustenance. For groups whose very numbers were threadbare, every calorie mattered, every child's survival was precious, and fire made that possible. But fire was fragile. A single storm could drown it, a careless moment could scatter the embers into dust. Unlike flint and tinder, we know today, rekindling a flame from nothing was a near impossible task for many early humans. Once caught, once coaxed into being, fire was guarded as though it were breath itself. And so came the fire keepers, those who sat through the night to feed the embers, those who shielded sparks from the wind, those who carried glowing coals wrapped in leaves or tucked into hollowed wood as the group moved across barren landscapes. Their duty was sacred, not in the sense of ritual alone, but in the simple fact that without their vigilance, entire families might perish. Imagine walking through darkness, the earth cold under your bare feet, the air sharp in your lungs, while in your hands you carry a fragile cradle of glowing coals. Each step must be careful. A stumble could extinguish the last warmth of the group. Your companions follow behind you in silence, their lives bound to the small, faint red glow you protect. In that moment, fire is more than element. It is a child, a god, a fragile thread binding the living to the future. The presence of fire reshaped every sense. The smell of smoke clung to skin and hides, masking the scent of humans from predators who might otherwise stalk them. The warmth pressed into weary muscles, loosening the ache of endless travel. The light cast away the void, giving shape to the night and the reassurance that the darkness was not absolute. Even the sound of fire mattered. The soft crackle, the hiss of sap, the pop of wood splitting, all signals that the barrier between life and chaos still held. Fossilized hearths, small circles of charred stone and ash, tell us that fire became a center of existence. Around it, families gathered not only for food, but for comfort. Stories may have been told here, warnings shared, knowledge passed from one generation to the next. In the wavering light, gestures became visible, words carried farther. Fire did not only allow humans to survive the night, it allowed them to communicate in deeper ways. It stretched the hours of connection, giving time for memory and imagination to settle into the minds of children, carried forward across generations. For a people scattered into tiny groups, these gatherings may have been the glue that held them together. The fire was not just a hearth, it was a heart, the center around which meaning was formed. The embers at dawn were not only the promise of warmth, but of continuity, proof that the thread had not broken during the night. And yet, how fragile it was. A downpour could smother it, a gust could scatter the coals. In those moments, when flames died and cold returned, terror must have pressed heavy on the group. For without fire, food was harder to eat, predators harder to deter, nights harder to endure. The scramble to restart it, to coax sparks from stone, to blow life into dry tinder. This was not just an inconvenience. It was a desperate race against the chill of night and the hunger of the body. Losing fire could mean losing life itself. It is possible, and perhaps even likely, that some groups never let their fires die. For years, maybe even decades, the same flame may have been nurtured, carried, divided, and rekindled, but never fully extinguished. That continuity tied generations together. The fire burning when a child was born may have been the same fire warming their hands as an elder, a living lineage of flame as important as the bloodlines it protected. Consider the intimacy of that. A girl cupping her hands around embers as her mother once had. A man feeding wood into flames as his father had done. The crackling hearth became an inheritance, passed down like memory itself. In such fragile times, fire was not a tool, it was kin. There is poetry in how deeply fire transformed humanity. It altered our very biology. Cooking softened food, allowing smaller teeth and shorter digestive tracts, freeing energy that fueled our growing brains. Warmth allowed us to endure cold nights, to expand into regions we otherwise could not. Safety from predators allowed more time for connection, for creativity, for planning. Fire was not just survival in the present, it was evolution shaping the future. Every flame lit against the dark was a step toward what we would become. But in the Bottleneck, fire's importance sharpened to its most extreme. With populations so few, every survival advantage mattered, and none was greater than fire. Imagine standing in a cave on a freezing night, the stone damp against your back, your body huddled close to others, while firelight danced across the walls. The air is thick with smoke, your eyes sting, but you are alive. Outside, snow drifts and predators roam. Inside, the flames paint stories across stone, shadows flickering in ways that might inspire memory, imagination, even art. Perhaps this is where the seeds of creativity were planted, in the glow of fire, when survival gave just enough space for thought to wander. The firekeeper, sitting awake long after others had drifted into uneasy sleep, would have known the weight of that role. The hiss of rain outside, the sigh of wind in the grass, the heavy breathing of those resting, all of it lay in balance against the fragile red coals. Each stir of wood, each gentle breath coaxing flame, was an act of devotion. They were not simply keeping fire, they were keeping humanity. It is telling that across cultures, even in much later times, myths and traditions often speak of fire as divine, as stolen from the gods, as something to be guarded, honored, feared. Those echoes may come from this very era, when our survival through the bottleneck rested on the thin flame kept alive in caves, in valleys, along coasts where cold winds swept. To early humans, fire was not an invention to boast of. It was a companion that could be lost, a living force that demanded respect. Close your eyes and picture it, the stars blazing overhead, sharp and clear in the thin, cold air, the grass whispering with hidden movement, and at the center of it all a small fire, crackling, glowing, alive. Around it a circle of humans bound by its warmth, their survival written in the flames, every spark a promise, every ember a memory, every flicker a heartbeat of the species itself. The firekeepers held that heartbeat in their hands, and because they did, the story did not end. In the long cold centuries of the bottleneck, when green valleys withered and herds dwindled into silence, hunger became the truest companion of humanity. Imagine waking beneath a pale sky, the air crisp with morning chill, your stomach already empty. The sound of wind sighing across the grass is louder than it should be, because the fields where animals once grazed now lie bare. The horizon stretches vast and indifferent, offering no promise of food. In such a world, survival was not about preference, but about endurance, and endurance meant eating whatever could be found. Gone were the days of choice. Humans learned to take nourishment where they could, scraping marrow from bones left behind by lions, gathering shellfish from tidal pools, chewing bitter roots pulled from hard soil, swallowing insects that writhed under overturned stones. These were not meals in the sense we know them now, not feasts, not comfort. They were fragments of life taken from the edges of the possible, enough to push another day forward. Each mouthful was not enjoyment, but a fragile bargain with time. The evidence of this desperation lies in the earth itself. Archaeological sites reveal bones split open with deliberate precision, the marks of stone tools sharp upon them. The marrow inside, fat-rich, calorie-dense, was treasure. In the crack of bone, in the sucking taste of marrow drawn onto the tongue, there was survival. Imagine the sound of stone striking bone, the echo of the split, the smell of iron and fat rising into the air. Around small fires, these bones would have been passed hand to hand, each person taking what little they could. On coasts where the sea still offered abundance, shellfish became lifelines. Hearths filled with charred shells, layer upon layer, testify to their importance. Picture a shoreline at low tide, the salt air thick on your lips, your hands wet and cold as you pry limpets from rocks, dig clams from sand, or gather seaweed tangled in the surf. The rhythm of waves crashing, the cries of sea birds circling above, the splash of water against stone, all of these became part of the soundscape of survival. In such places, the ocean itself was a larder, one that never fully emptied even when the land failed. And where forests still clung to life, roots and tubers were dug from the soil. Imagine kneeling on the ground, your fingers pressing into damp earth, pulling up a tangled root, its skin thick and bitter. Fire softened it, smoke curling into the air as the flesh within became edible, if not pleasant. The texture was fibrous, the taste acrid, but it filled the belly, and that was enough. Children may have learned to recognize these plants by smell, by sight, by the way leaves curled or stems bent. Such knowledge, passed from elder to youth, was the difference between nourishment and poison. Insects, too, became part of the diet. Grubs pulled from rotting wood, crunchy locusts roasted in flames, termites scraped from mounds. Imagine the sound of wings crackling in fire, the sharp, nutty taste as they were eaten. To us now it might feel alien, but to them it was normal, necessary, even life-saving. Each bite was protein, energy to walk another mile, to carry fire across another plain, to endure another night. What is remarkable is not only that humans survived on these foods, but that our very biology adapted to this desperate omnivory. The digestive systems we carry today, able to process both meat and plants, starch and fat, are echoes of those times. We became omnivores, not out of curiosity, but out of necessity, shaped by centuries of famine into creatures that could extract life from whatever the earth would give. Our enzymes, our teeth, even the bacteria in our guts reflect that legacy. But survival diets were not only about what could be eaten. They were about timing, opportunity, and risk. Scavenging from predator kills, for example, meant venturing into danger. Imagine approaching a carcass abandoned by lions, the smell of blood thick, the air buzzing with flies. The bones are cracked, the flesh nearly gone, but there is marrow still, fat still, scraps enough to sustain. Yet danger lingers. The lions may return, hyenas circle, vultures dive. To step forward in that moment was to weigh hunger against death. Sometimes the risk was worth it, sometimes it was not. But often there was no choice. These diets of desperation shaped more than the body. They shaped behavior, culture, and thought. Groups that could innovate, that could find new ways to prepare or gather food, endured where others perished, the memory of where shellfish beds were richest, which roots could be eaten, which insects were plentiful in which season. These became threads of knowledge woven into survival. Shared in whispers around the fire, taught through demonstration, passed like heirlooms across generations, they formed an oral map of the world's hidden abundance. Even hunger itself taught lessons. To endure days without food was to learn patience, cooperation, and resilience. To watch children go without, yet still to keep moving, required strength of spirit as much as body. The hollow ache in the belly became part of human identity, carving determination into the bones of our species. And when food was finally found, when the first taste of marrow or roasted shellfish met the tongue, it was not indulgence but relief, a reminder that life could continue a little longer. Picture the smell of smoke rising into the night, carrying the faint tang of roasted clams. Picture the crunch of bone under stone, the thick fatty taste of marrow warming the throat. Picture hands, rough and calloused, holding roots blackened by fire, passing them to children who chew slowly, eyes heavy with fatigue but alive with gratitude. These were the meals of humanity's crucible, meager, uneven, but enough, always just enough. It is humbling to realize that the resilience we pride ourselves on today was forged in these meals of desperation, not in banquets, not in harvests, but in the scraping together of what remained when the world seemed determined to strip everything away. We survived because we could make food out of almost nothing, because we could see opportunity where others saw only waste. Lions left behind bones, we found marrow, the tide left shellfish clinging to rocks, we pried them free. Roots hid in the soil, we dug them out. Insects scurried unseen, we gathered them by hand. That adaptability was not glamorous, but it was decisive. Other human cousins may have faltered because their diets were too narrow, their ability to adjust too limited. We did not outfight the predators, nor outbreed the droughts, but we outlasted hunger by turning everything into possibility. And in doing so, we carved a path through the bottleneck that might otherwise have closed. Tonight, when you taste the variety of foods available in the modern world, bread, fruit, meat, vegetables, sweets, remember that this abundance was bought by desperation. That your body, capable of digesting starch, sugar, fat, and protein alike, was shaped by ancestors who once ate whatever they could, whenever they could, however little it was. That we are omnivores, not by luxury, but because we were made to be, pressed by famine into resilience. Close your eyes and imagine it, the faint glow of embers, the crack of bone, the briny taste of sea air, the bitter chew of roots. Imagine hunger as a constant presence, never far, always waiting. And then imagine the relief of finding something, anything, that could be eaten. That was the rhythm of life during the bottleneck, not feast and famine, but famine and survival. And in that rhythm, our species was forged. In the fragile world of the bottleneck, survival was never guaranteed by fire alone, or by food gathered from reluctant landscapes. It was written most delicately sights in the births of children, in the cries of infants, carried against the chest, in the thin hope that they might one day grow strong enough to walk on their own. Every generation depended not only on endurance, but on the narrow thread of reproduction, and in those long centuries, when our numbers dwindled to only thousands, the birth of a child was not merely a moment of joy. It was the continuation of the species itself. Imagine a small camp at dusk. The sky glows with fading light, the smell of smoke drifts from a fire, and from within a shelter of hides comes the faint sound of a newborn's first cry. The group gathers close, their faces lit by firelight, eyes wide with wonder and relief. In a world filled with predators, drought, and hunger, this small sound is more than life beginning. It is hope refusing to vanish. Yet for every child born, the dangers that followed were immense. Illness could strike without warning. A mother weakened by famine could falter. A chill night could take what little strength remained. Archaeological evidence, though sparse, suggests that infant mortality was devastatingly high. Many children never saw their first year, and those who survived faced dangers at every stage. For populations already so small, each loss was catastrophic, not only for the family but for the species. Imagine the silence after a child's cry fades, the weight of grief pressing on a group that knows how much has been lost. One life gone was not only sorrow in the moment, it was a narrowing of possibilities, a fragile thread cut short. And yet, through this delicate balance, humanity endured. The secret lay not only in biology but in bonds, where animals often bore the weight of reproduction solely on the mother. Humans carried it as a collective. Shared child-rearing, sometimes called cooperative breeding, may have been the glue that held us together in those desperate times. A child was not only the child of one mother, but of the group. Arms passed them from one lap to another, milk was shared, food divided, safety ensured by many. The cry of a child stirred not only parents but a whole circle of kin and companions. Picture it, the warmth of fire flickering against tired faces, a child sleeping soundly in the crook of an elder's arm, the soft hush of a lullaby humming low in the throat. These quiet acts of care, repeated countless times, bound people together more strongly than a hunger or danger could tear them apart. In this way, survival was not only physical, it was social. But biology was not forgiving. With so few individuals alive at any given time, inbreeding was a constant risk. Genetic diversity narrowed, and the dangers of recessive traits, diseases, vulnerabilities, infertility could spread quickly. The margin for error was razor thin. That humanity survived such fragility at all speaks to chance as much as to resilience. Some lineages must have ended quietly, lost to sterility or disease. Others, by luck or adaptation, carried forward, passing on enough variation to keep the species alive. The fact that we are here means that the thread, however thin, never fully snapped. The rhythms of reproduction must have been woven tightly into the seasons of survival. A woman carrying a child needed more food, more rest, more safety, luxuries in a time when famine, predators, and endless migration pressed on every side. For the group, her survival was as important as her child's. Hands would have lifted loads from her shoulders. Fires would have been kept warmer. Food portions shared to give her strength. And when birth came, it would have been dangerous. Without medicine, without tools beyond the body itself, many mothers did not survive. Each successful birth, then, was not only joy but miracle. The sounds of such moments can be imagined, the soft murmur of voices encouraging, the sudden wail of life breaking into the night, the sighs of relief as both mother and child breathed through the ordeal, the air thick with smoke and sweat, the firelight catching the sheen of tears. Every sense, every detail would have etched itself into memory, because each birth mattered far beyond the family. It mattered to the fragile continuation of humankind. It is easy now, with billions alive, to forget how narrow this passage was. But then each child was a bridge between extinction and survival. Groups that lost too many children vanished, their stories silenced. Groups that found ways to care, to cooperate, to protect the young against impossible odds endured. In those patterns, the future was decided. Our very psychology may carry echoes of that time. The tenderness humans feel for infants, the instinct to respond to a baby's cry, the deep pull of family and kinship, all of these may have been sharpened during the bottleneck. To ignore a child's needs in such times was to risk not only one life, but the life of the species. And so care became instinct, compassion became survival. The emotional bonds we take for granted today may have been carved into us by millennia of fragile reproduction. Imagine walking under a cold sky, a child bundled against your chest, their breath warm against your skin. Every step you take is slower, more cautious, because you carry not only your own survival, but the continuation of something larger. Behind you, the group moves as one, protecting, supporting, carrying fire and food, eyes always alert for danger. The child is everyone's burden and everyone's hope. In such a scene, you can feel how survival was never the work of the lone. It was the work of many, tied together by love, necessity, and a sense of shared fate. Even grief may have played a role. In the sorrow of loss, in the rituals of mourning that likely began even then, humans found meaning and connection. A child buried near a hearth, wrapped in care even in death, speaks of love too deep to be erased by hardship. These bonds, forged in firelight and loss, gave humanity strength not only to endure hunger and predators, but to carry the unbearable and still walk forward. The narrow thread of reproduction was fragile, frayed by disease, famine, and risk, but it was held together by hands joined across generations, by mothers, fathers, grandparents, siblings, companions, all shaping a circle around each new life, and through that circle humanity endured where logic suggests we should have failed. The air of those nights would have been filled not only with the crackle of fire and the sounds of predators, but with the small vital sounds of children breathing, of mothers humming, of families holding close. These were the sounds of survival, as essential as the flames themselves. Every life that began was a light against the dark, and though many lights went out too soon, enough remained to guide us through the long winter of near extinction. And so, when you hear the cry of a child today, know that it's not just a voice of the present. It is the echo of countless cries from the bottleneck, each one a fragile promise, each one a victory over silence. The narrow thread held, stretched across centuries, across hunger, across death, and because it held, we are here. When you look at the stars scattered across a night sky, it's easy to imagine infinity, endless lights, endless variation, a universe too vast to measure. Yet within us, within the code of our bodies, the story is the opposite. We are not infinite in variation. We are strikingly uniform. Our DNA shaped not by abundance, but by survival's scarcity. Hidden in the spiral of every chromosome is a memory of that long bottleneck, a scar from the time when humanity nearly disappeared. Geneticists first began to notice this strange uniformity when they compared us to our closest relatives. Chimpanzees, though far fewer in number, hold far more diversity in their genes. Gorillas, confined to shrinking forests, still carry greater variation than 8 billion humans across the globe. Even orangutans, stranded on scattered islands, are more genetically varied than the entirety of our species. If you place two humans from opposite sides of the earth, side by side, their DNA will be more alike than that of two chimpanzees living in the same forest. Imagine standing in a rainforest, the air damp, the ground soft with fallen leaves. Two chimpanzees swing overhead, their calls echoing through the canopy. Though they may belong to the same troop, their genetic differences run deeper than the differences between you and someone you've never met, living oceans away. This revelation is humbling, that our enormous population is bound together by a narrow strand of similarity, a legacy of near erasure written into our very being. This lack of variation is the clearest scar of the bottleneck. For nearly 200,000 years, the human lineage was reduced to tiny groups, sometimes no more than a few hundred breeding individuals. In such conditions, many possibilities were lost. Entire genetic pathways that might have flourished were extinguished. Traits that might have made us more resistant to disease, more adaptable to environments, or simply different in appearance, vanished in silence. What survived did so by chance, not by destiny. Scientists call this process genetic drift. In large populations, variation spreads wide. Rare mutations may disappear before they can take hold. But in small, fragile groups, chance plays a much larger role. Imagine rolling dice again and again, with only a few players. The outcomes narrow quickly. Patterns repeat. Randomness itself becomes the architect. Traits that might have been rare became fixed simply because those who carried them survived long enough to pass them on. Our shared humanity today, from the color of our eyes to the way our immune systems fight infection, bears the imprint of that randomness. Think of your own body as a living archive. In your cells are sequences of DNA that survived the crucible not because they were stronger, but because the people who carried them were simply among the lucky few to endure. Within you are echoes of ancient vulnerabilities. Certain immune system genes, for example, suggest our ancestors once stood exposed to disease without enough diversity to defend themselves. Epidemics may have cut through small bands, leaving survivors who carried only the resistance they happened to possess. That resistance, carried forward, became the inheritance of all who came after. Other traits tell subtler stories. Some sequences spread widely, not because they offered clear advantage, but because chance alone preserved them. Perhaps a random mutation appeared in one small group, in their hair texture, in their metabolism, in the shape of their skulls. In a population of millions, it might have disappeared without consequence. But in a group of hundreds, it became a thread carried forward into all of us. Look around today at the diversity of human faces, of bodies, of abilities. Much of it is not destiny, but the residue of chance survival in that long cold bottleneck. The scar of uniformity runs deep. Even now our species is more genetically alike than it should be for its size. This unity has made us strong in some ways, giving us the capacity to interconnect, to adapt as one lineage without deep division. But it has also left us vulnerable. Diseases that thrive on uniformity, plagues, pandemics, find fertile ground in our similarity. Where other species may resist through variation, we sometimes fall together because we are too alike. And yet from this narrowing came identity. We are one species, one family, bound not only by culture but by blood. Imagine the wind sweeping across continents, carrying with it the breath of billions. Every exhale, every heartbeat traces back to the same narrow line of survivors. In that sense, the scar is also a bond. To hold this truth is to understand that we are not inevitable. Our existence is not the outcome of strength alone, but of fragile persistence shaped by chance. Every chromosome carries silent reminders. The fused chromosome that sets us apart from other great apes, the immune sequences that whisper of ancient epidemics, the surprising uniformity that testifies to how few we once were. These are not just scientific details. They are stories written in the architecture of our being, stories older than memory, carried forward in silence until we learned to read them. Close your eyes and imagine the spiral of DNA, twisting endlessly, each rung a story from the past. Some rungs are missing, stories lost to extinction. Others repeat the same sequence passed again and again, because those who carried it survived. The helix itself becomes a time capsule, holding within it the memory of near erasure. It is a scar invisible to the eye, but undeniable in its reach. The bottleneck was a crucible. It stripped away diversity, pressed humanity into its barest form, and left behind a lineage marked by both fragility and resilience. In the thinness of our variation lies the memory of how close we came to vanishing. Every cell of your body whispers that story. It tells of hunger, of fire carried through storms, of children born against the odds, of diseases weathered, of chance mutations that became the foundation of billions. And when you breathe, when you feel the steady rhythm of your own heart, you are listening to the outcome of that long survival. The scars remain, but so does the life they preserved. Humanity was reduced, but not erased, and in the code of our being, the story of that survival still waits to be heard. 74,000 years ago, the earth itself seemed to exhale with fury. Beneath the green ridges of what is now Indonesia, a mountain tore itself apart. The Toba supervolcano, slumbering for millennia, erupted with a force so immense it reshaped the planet. The sky darkened, The ground shook, and ash rose into the stratosphere, spreading like a veil across the globe. Imagine standing on a hillside thousands of miles away. The air is suddenly heavy, dimmed not by twilight, but by a strange, unnatural haze. The sun hangs above, pale and weak, its warmth swallowed by a ceiling of ash. Days feel like dusk. Nights are darker still. The wind carries fine grey dust, coating leaves, water, and skin. The world tastes of stone. Scientists believe this eruption was one of the most powerful in the last 2 million years. Its plume of ash may have circled the globe, dimming sunlight, plunging temperatures downward, and unraveling ecosystems that had already been fragile. In the silence of those years, plants struggled to grow, grasses yellowed, and herds starved. For humans, already pressed into small numbers, the eruption was not only a geological event, but a trial of survival written in fire and shadow. Consider the scale. Modern calculations suggest the blast was thousands of times larger than any volcanic eruption in recorded history. The sound, alone had you been near enough, would have split the air like a god's drumbeat, rolling over forests, shaking mountains, drowning every other noise in a single violent roar. Rivers boiled, forests ignited, skies darkened as pumice rained down. But the great danger came after, in the quiet, in the long winter that followed. Ash spread across continents, falling into rivers and lakes, changing their chemistry, choking life from waters that once ran clear. The soil itself turned hostile, covered in layers of sterile dust that smothered seeds. Animals starved, and with them humans lost their prey. The air grew colder as sunlight dimmed, ice stretching further across the land. It is no wonder that some scientists believe the human population, already reduced by the bottleneck, may have dwindled further after Toba, shrinking to a precarious thread of only a few thousand. Imagine a family huddled in a cave, the fire burning low. Outside, the wind blows ash across the land, the air dry and biting, the horizon blurred into grey. The smell of sulphur lingers, sharp and acrid. Their eyes sting from the dust. Food is scarce. A rabbit, thin and weak, provides almost nothing. A handful of roots must be stretched to feed many. Each breath carries the memory of the eruption, the world itself seeming hostile, the sky a constant reminder that nature's power is beyond measure. And yet, the impact of Toba is still debated. Some scientists believe it caused a global catastrophe, plunging Earth into a volcanic winter lasting years. Others suggest its effects, while immense, were more localized, felt most strongly in South Asia, with humans elsewhere adapting more easily. The truth may lie between, devastating in some regions, survivable in others. What is certain is that humanity endured, though perhaps more fractured, more reduced, more tempered by fire and famine than before. If you close your eyes, you can imagine the silence that followed. After the roar, after the ash fell, after the first desperate weeks, there must have been a stillness unlike any other. The forest floor muffled under layers of grey, rivers flowing thick and strange, the air colder, the light dimmer, the songs of birds grew fewer, the cries of animals vanished. Humanity lived in that silence, carving existence from a world veiled in shadow. This eruption, whether or not it nearly ended us, is a reminder of fragility. Our species has always been tested, by ice that covered the continents, by drought that cracked the earth, by predators who stalked the night, and here by a mountain's wrath, by a plume of ash that dimmed the sun itself. The earth did not bend to humanity. It demanded that humanity bend to it. What must it have felt like to walk under that strange sky, to see the sun as a pale disk, to feel the temperature drop as if seasons had collapsed into sudden winter? the texture of the ground, no longer soil but ash that shifted underfoot, clinging to skin, filling lungs. The water, once clear, now cloudy with grey. Each step carried weight, each breath uncertainty, and yet life clung on. Perhaps humans sought refuge near coasts where the ocean's bounty remained when land failed. Shellfish, resilient and plentiful, may have fed starving families when plants could not grow and herds had vanished. The salty air, heavy with spray, would have tasted like salvation. In other places, fire and ingenuity turned roots into meals, insects into protein, marrow into strength. Once again, desperation carved creativity. The story of Toba is not only one of destruction, it is one of resilience. Populations that survived carried forward the memory of catastrophe, etched into myths that may have echoed through generations. Stories of endless night, of sun swallowed, of fire that burned the world. Across cultures today, tales of great floods, great darkness, great fire linger. Perhaps they are distant echoes of this eruption, passed through centuries as warning and remembrance, but even if Toba did not drive humanity to the brink again, it showed how thin the margin always was. Our survival has never been guaranteed. We are here not because the earth spared us, but because we endured, even when the planet itself seemed determined to erase us. Close your eyes and breathe the thought of that time. The sky dim, the air cold, the world grey. Imagine hands clutching fire against the wind, eyes searching for food in barren landscapes, children sleeping against the warmth of their parents' bodies as ash drifted outside. The eruption was not only geology, it was human experience, fear, hunger, endurance, and through it all, the fragile thread held. The memory of Toba, written not only in volcanic stone, but in our genes and perhaps in our myths, is a reminder of how close we have always lived to the edge. Fire, ice, famine, disease, predators, mountains tearing themselves apart. These were the crucibles that shaped us, and yet from each we emerged, scarred but alive. The earth will always test us. The question is not whether it will erupt again, or freeze again, or dry again. It is how we endure, how we adapt, how we carry the fragile flame of humanity forward. That has always been the task, that has always been the story. Picture a night deep in the Pleistocene. The fire burns low, its orange glow trembling across the walls of a cave. Outside, the wind carries the scent of cold earth and distant rain. Shadows flicker over stone, bending into shapes that seem almost alive. Around the fire, a group gathers, faces lit in gold, eyes reflecting light. There is silence for a moment, save for the crackling of wood. Then a voice begins, slow, rhythmic, carrying words not yet written but deeply felt. A story begins to weave itself through the room, binding those who listen into something larger than themselves. This, perhaps, was the secret of survival when nature pushed us so close to the edge. Not only fire, not only food, not only the chance of reproduction. Culture, the act of sharing meaning, of creating symbols, of teaching through ritual and story. These were the threads that tied fragile groups together when everything else threatened to tear them apart. Archaeological traces suggest that even in times of famine and fear, humans made time for more than survival. Bits of ochre pigment scraped onto stone, tools decorated with delicate marks, shells pierced and strung into ornaments, these fragments whisper of a deeper need. At first glance, such efforts seem impractical. Why carve a line into bone when every ounce of energy was precious? Why grind pigment when calories were scarce? And yet these acts mattered. They bound people together, forged identity, carried memory. In a world where extinction loomed, culture became as necessary as bread. Imagine the feel of ochre dust between fingers, soft and earthy, staining skin a deep red. To paint with it was not simply decoration, it was connection to others, to ancestors, to the unseen. Perhaps it marked belonging, perhaps it carried ritual meaning, perhaps it was simply the joy of leaving a trace behind. Whatever its purpose, it was more than instinct. It was imagination. Shared practices, no matter how small, created cohesion. A band of 30 humans, scattered in a hostile world, could not survive without trust. Rituals reinforced that trust. The act of preparing food together, the rhythm of songs hummed in the dark, the passing of a carved tool from one hand to another, these built unity. Unity meant fewer conflicts, more cooperation, and greater resilience when disaster struck. Culture also extended memory. Without writing, knowledge could vanish with a single death. But stories preserved it, a tale of where water could be found, shaped into rhythm and repeated at night, was not only instruction but heritage, a warning about predators, told as myth, carried both caution and awe. Knowledge lived not only in bones and tools, but in words, in gestures, in rituals repeated across generations. Close your eyes and imagine sitting by the fire, the warmth brushing your skin, the smoke stinging your eyes. An elder leans forward, their voice low, telling of a valley far to the east, where the rains return each year. The children listen, their faces intent, the crackling of fire marking the pauses. Tomorrow, or perhaps years later, those children will recall the valley, and survival will follow. Story was not entertainment, it was instruction disguised as wonder. And yet, there must also have been moments when culture rose beyond necessity, when laughter rang in the night, when someone traced patterns on stone for no reason other than beauty, when songs were hummed not for teaching but for comfort. These moments, fragile and brief, lifted spirits. They gave reason to endure when endurance seemed impossible. Decorated tools, pigments, ornaments, these are small clues, but they reveal immense truths, that even when our ancestors were pressed to the edge of extinction, they did not live only to eat and sleep. They dreamed, they remembered, they sought meaning. Culture was not a luxury draped over survival. It was woven into the heart of it. Think of a shell found on the South African coast, pierced carefully to be strung into a necklace. The sea salt clings to it, its surface polished by hands long gone. That shell was once worn close to the skin of someone who faced the same fears we speak of now. Hunger, predators, cold. Why adorn themselves in such a world? Because identity mattered, because to wear it was to declare we are still here and we belong to one another. Culture also gave humans adaptability, inventions passed not only as tools but as traditions, a sharper blade design carried forward through imitation, a cooking method preserved in ritual, a hunting strategy remembered in chant. Each innovation became part of a cultural toolkit, ready to be drawn upon in times of crisis. Where biology was slow to change, culture adapted swiftly, giving humans an edge no other species could match. The soundscape of culture would have been distinctive. The hollow rhythm of wood struck against stone, the rise and fall of human voices in chant, the crack of bone in demonstration, the hum of lullabies soothing restless children. In the darkness, these sounds created belonging, a reminder that no one was truly alone. And the textures, the rough feel of carved bone, the smoothness of polished stone, the soft brush of pigment dust on skin, each carried meaning beyond function. Each linked the present moment to a larger story. Perhaps this was the greatest gift of culture. It stretched time. In the face of death, culture made the future imaginable. In the silence of loss, it made the past endurable. It gave shape to continuity when continuity itself was fragile. Consider a burial. A child laid carefully in the earth, wrapped with care, perhaps adorned with ochre or a carved object. Such burials speak of grief, yes, but also of belief. That the child mattered beyond the moment, that their life was part of something larger, that even in death connection remained. In a world of near extinction, this belief was radical. It gave weight to life, it gave courage to continue. Culture may also explain why Homo sapiens endured when cousins like the Neanderthals eventually faded. Both were intelligent, both skilled hunters, both capable of fire, but perhaps we carried culture in ways that were deeper, more flexible, more binding. Our capacity to create symbols, to weave meaning into survival, may have given us the edge. We did not only adapt to the environment, we adapted the environment to our imagination. Imagine again the firelight dancing on stone walls. Shadows flicker, shapes shift. Someone reaches out with pigment-stained fingers and draws. The line is simple, the gesture instinctive, but in that moment something profound occurs. The wall becomes memory. The mark becomes story. And those who gather around it feel not only the presence of their small group, but the echo of something larger, a humanity that stretches beyond the immediate into the realm of the possible. That is what culture offered, not escape from hardship, but the strength to endure it, unity, memory, identity, imagination. These were as vital as food, as fire, as water. They were survival tools, forged not in stone, but in the shared heart of the species. And so, when we look back to that time, to the bottleneck and the long winter of existence, we see not only hunger and fear. We see red pigment on stone, shells worn close to the chest, bones carved with patterns, fireside stories shaping memory. We see culture fragile and luminous, a light carried through the dark. It was not a luxury. It was the thread that held humanity together when all else threatened to break. The story of our survival has always carried echoes, faint voices from other humans who walked the same earth, breathed the same air, gazed at the same stars. For a long stretch of deep time, we were not alone. The bottleneck that threatened Homo sapiens was not endured in isolation. Across mountains, forests, and plains, other humans thrived. Neanderthals in Europe's cold valleys, Denisovans in the shadowed ranges of Asia. Their footsteps mingled with ours, their fires glowed in the night, their hands shaped stone and bone with skill. And yet their stories ended, while ours continued. Imagine walking across a steppe at dusk. The horizon glows with a dying sun, the air sharp with cold. In the distance, a thin column of smoke rises. It is not from wildfire, nor from lightning. It is the hearth of others. You draw closer, heart quickening. Figures emerge in the firelight. Their bodies are familiar, yet not quite the same. Broader shoulders, heavy brows, deeper chests. Neanderthals. They turn toward you, their eyes reflecting the flames, and for a moment the world feels doubled. Two humanities meeting in silence. The Neanderthals were no shadows. They were masters of their environment, shaping tools with precision, hunting in cooperative groups, surviving in the harsh chill of Ice Age Europe, where winters bit deep and forests stretched endless. Their breath steamed in frosty air, their hands calloused from stone and sinew. For hundreds of thousands of years, they endured in climates that would have crushed weaker beings. To meet them would have been to meet equals, not beasts, not brutes, but humans of a different kind. In Asia, the Denisovans lived more quietly in the archaeological record, known only from a fragment of finger bone, a single tooth, and above all, from the ghostly traces they left in our DNA. Yet their presence was real and their reach wide. They may have thrived in the high plateaus of Tibet, where the air thins and breath grows short. Modern Tibetans still carry a Denisovan gene that allows them to thrive at altitude, a genetic gift from those long-vanished cousins. Imagine them climbing mountain ridges, lungs filling with thin cold air, bodies adapted to a world where most would falter. Their survival was etched into the very rocks of the highlands. For a time, the earth was shared between many. Homo erectus lingered in some regions, their million-year legacy fading slowly. Neanderthals dominated Europe, Denisovans spread through Asia, and Homo sapiens wandered out of Africa in scattered waves. Imagine the world then, a sunrise spilling across one connected land, carrying light over deserts, grasslands, mountains, and coasts. And in each place different humans stirred, different fires lit, different songs carried into the air. The planet was one stage, but the players were many. The bottleneck may have acted as a filter, trimming away the fragile, preserving only the adaptable. Yet adaptability alone did not guarantee which lineage would dominate. For millennia, it was uncertain who would endure. Perhaps Neanderthals seemed stronger, better suited to the cold. Perhaps Denisovans seemed more resilient. Their genes spread across Asia. The survival of Homo sapiens was never written in stone. It was a chance outcome, a roll of the evolutionary dice. But there were moments when our paths crossed. In caves and valleys, in forests and plains, sapiens met their cousins. Sometimes it was competition, two groups hunting the same prey, two families gathering at the same river. Tension hung in the air like the scent of rain. Resources were scarce, and every encounter carried risk. Fossils bear signs of violence, fractured skulls, weapon marks. Conflict may have flared, as it so often does when scarcity tightens its grip. And yet, not all meetings ended in blood. Our DNA tells a softer story, too, of mingling and blending. In the blood of every non-African alive today is a trace of Neanderthal heritage. In the genes of Tibetans and Melanesians, Denisovans whisper still. These are not metaphors, but living fragments of their existence carried inside us. Imagine the warmth of two humans sitting together by firelight, hands brushing, bonds forming, children born of union. In their veins flowed both lineages, their laughter and breath binding two families into one. Those children carried genes that still shape our lungs, our skin, our immune defenses. In this way, the shadows of other humans never entirely disappeared. They remain quietly alive within us. But their independent stories did end. By 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals were gone. Their caves fell silent, their tools lay unused. The Denisovans too faded, leaving only fragments of bone and invisible threads of DNA. For a time, it was not clear who would vanish and who would endure. But as climates shifted, as challenges multiplied, it was Homo sapiens who carried forward. Why? The answer is not simple. Perhaps it was our networks, the way we shared knowledge across groups, binding strangers into allies through culture and story. Perhaps it was flexibility in diet and behavior, a readiness to eat shellfish when herds disappeared, to craft new tools when old ones failed. Perhaps it was sheer luck, a small band in the right place at the right time, carrying genes and traditions that proved resilient. The truth is likely all of these, layered together like the rings of a tree, each telling a part of the story. Still the shadows remain, in us, in memory, in speculation. When you look into a mirror, know that in the curve of your jaw, in the strength of your hands, in the rhythm of your breath, echoes of Neanderthals and Denisovans linger. We are not purely sapiens, we are mosaics, carrying fragments of those who once shared the world. Their shadows stretch into the present, even as their independent voices have gone quiet. Close your eyes and imagine a world lit by many fires. The smoke rises into the same sky, carrying with it the scent of wood and flesh, the murmur of voices. In one valley, Neanderthals gather, their bodies broad, their laughter deep. In another, Denisovans climb ridges, their lungs strong against thin air. In another, sapiens huddle near coasts, tasting salt on their tongues. The earth was one then, vast and immense, and humanity was plural. Each fire was a thread in the great fabric of survival. The bottleneck narrowed those threads. Many unraveled, ours did not. But in the weave of our DNA, the patterns of others still shimmer faintly, reminders that survival was not inevitable, and that our story was never ours alone. We carry their shadows with us. Every step forward is walked on ground they once trod. Every breath draws the same air they once breathed. Their absence shapes our presence. Their silence deepens our voice. Humanity, as we know it, is not the story of one lineage alone, but the story of many, some vanished, some mingled, some remembered in the marrow of our very bones. And so, when you think of the bottleneck, do not picture only a single thread of survival. Picture a tapestry of human stories, some cut short, some woven together, all cast against the vast horizon of time. In that great weave, sapiens are the thread that endures. But in our endurance, we are never alone. We carry the shadows of other humans, still alive in the rhythm of our hearts, still written in the code of our cells, still whispering from the deep past. As scarcity deepened, innovation broadened. New techniques of hefting appeared, sinew twisted tight like cord, resin hardened into glue, bone sharpened and bound to wood. In the glow of firelight, families experimented with what nature gave them, the way resin bubbled and hardened when heated, the way hide could twist into rope, the way one stone could sharpen another. Each experiment carried risk, wasted effort, burnt hands, a tool broken at the wrong moment, but every success added another thread to the fragile web of survival. Cooking itself became an innovation. Roots, too tough to chew, softened in embers, their taste earthy and sweet. Shells cracked open on flat stones revealed meat rich with salt. Even the marrow of bones, once unreachable, was coaxed free by fire and sharp edges. The hiss of fat dripping into coals, the smell of smoke mingling with roasted flesh. These were not luxuries. They were survival reimagined. The transformation of raw into cooked was more than chemistry. It was ingenuity pressed into the rhythms of daily life. Imagine the sensory chorus of one such evening. A circle gathers close to fire, sparks spiraling upward into the dark. The rhythmic tap of stone on stone punctuates the crackle of flames. A child giggles as an elder demonstrates the angle of a strike, the motion slow, deliberate, graceful as ritual. Smoke clings to hair and skin, the air heavy with the scent of resin and roasted roots. These are the moments where necessity and imagination fuse, where survival becomes teaching, where teaching becomes memory. Innovation was not uniform across the scattered bands. Some groups may have refined techniques, others never discovered. In one valley, a new style of spear might emerge, stronger, straighter, bound with resin and hide. In another, methods of scraping hides more efficiently might allow warmer clothing, better shelters, longer lives. The bottleneck, by isolating groups into small refuges, created both fragility and diversity of invention. What worked in one place could vanish if the group perished, while elsewhere a different method blossomed. Humanity's future rested on fragile chains of knowledge, carried mouth to mouth, hand to hand. And yet through this uneven progress a pattern began to form. Across continents, across generations, innovation became constant. Pressure demanded it. To stop creating was to slip back into danger. A spear point chipped sharper, a scraper angled better, a fire carried more carefully. These small refinements stacked upon one another, turning survival into resilience. The long trial of the bottleneck did not halt human ingenuity. It accelerated it. More than tools were invented in these years. Innovation stretched into the way people thought, the way they planned and organized. Cooperation became structured, tasks divided, one to shape stone, another to tend fire, another to scout for prey. The sound of napping was not solitary, it was part of a rhythm of roles. Through this, social innovation took root alongside material invention. Knowledge was not just preserved, it was distributed, embedded in the group itself. Imagination, too, expanded. A stone point was not only sharper, it was lighter, more balanced, better for hunting certain prey. A scraper could be shaped not only to clean hides but to carve wood, to etch patterns, to leave marks that were more than function. These subtle beginnings of symbolic thought may have first stirred under the same pressure that demanded sharper edges. Scarcity pressed humans not only to survive but to imagine, and imagination, once ignited, could not be contained. The landscape itself became a laboratory. Rivers smoothed stones perfect for flaking. Forests offered branches both flexible and strong. Caves held echoes, where voices could test sound, where tools struck stone in rhythms that became patterns. Even the sky, vast and unyielding, gave rhythm to life, the arc of the sun for daily work, the cycle of the moon for memory, the stars above as points of orientation. Each detail of the environment was studied, reshaped, transformed into knowledge. Innovation under pressure was never about abundance. It was about making much from little. A single piece of flint could be struck into dozens of flakes, each one a tool for scraping or cutting. A single animal hide could clothe, shelter, and bind. A single fire could cook, harden, preserve, and protect. Nothing was wasted. The creativity of survival was measured not by how much one had, but by how much one could make from the smallest of gifts. Picture one final scene. A hunter returns at dusk, empty-handed. The air is cool, tinged with the smell of earth after rain. Hunger presses on the band, but despair does not take them. Instead, the group gathers by the fire. Stones are struck. New points are shaped, lighter, sharper, better suited for the prey that evaded them. They are not defeated, they are preparing. In the rhythm of stone against stone, in the glow of firelight, in the murmur of teaching and learning, survival is reborn. The bottleneck was not only a crucible of endurance, but a forge of invention. Pressed against the edge of erasure, humanity discovered that survival was not just about strength or numbers. It was about imagination sharpened by necessity, creativity born from scarcity, innovation carried forward like fire. Every tool struck from stone was more than survival. It was a promise that we could shape the world even when the world tried to unmake us. Picture the world as it was nearly 1,000,000 years ago. The air sharp with cold, the land vast and shifting under the ice and drought, rivers swelling and then drying into cracked beds. For our ancestors, There was no such thing as staying put. To linger too long in one place was to risk hunger, thirst, or death. Survival was not a matter of building walls. It was a matter of movement. Migration was not a choice. It was the lifeline. You can almost hear it, the crunch of feet over frost-bitten grass, the soft splash of bare soles stepping into shallow streams, the hush of wind sweeping across open savannas. Each step forward carried a question. Would there be water beyond that ridge, shelter in that valley, food in that forest? The world was unpredictable, but the instinct to move, to follow, to wander, became deeply written into the human spirit. When climates shifted, landscapes transformed overnight in ways that stretched generations into hardship. Forests that once teemed with fruits and game thinned into sparse grasslands. Rivers that once carved lifelines through valleys turned into trickling threads, then disappeared, and so families gathered their few belongings, sharpened stones, dried roots, a glowing ember cradled in a clay shell, and they walked, always forward, always searching. These journeys were not grand conquests, as later myths might imagine. They were quiet, desperate retreats. A mother with a child on her hip, an elder leaning on a carved stick, hunters carrying spears balanced across their shoulders. And yet, with every retreat, with every forced march, humanity's reach extended. By following where the land pushed them, they learned new horizons. The Rift Valley in East Africa may have been the cradle, but droughts and volcanic upheavals drove some away from it. The air there carried the metallic tang of ash, the ground trembled with tremors, the grasslands burned and regrew in uneven patches. In those times, movement was survival. Some followed game northward, their eyes tracing the tracks of gazelle herds. Others went south, toward coasts where waves foamed against rocks and shellfish clung in abundance. Each migration fractured the population, but also wove threads outward, stitching human presence into new terrains. Imagine arriving at a coastline after weeks of walking inland plains. The smell of salt sharpens in the air, the horizon opens wide and endless, and the rhythmic sound of waves becomes both a lullaby and a promise. Here, food was dependable, crabs scuttling between rocks, mussels clinging in clusters, fish flashing silver beneath the surface. Perhaps it was here that some groups lingered, adapting to the tides, learning to crack shells, mastering patience as they waited for nets of woven reeds to trap the sea's bounty. The ocean became not just a boundary, but a refuge. In other regions, highlands offered salvation. Cool winds rolled down from mountain ridges, streams ran fresh and cold, plants thrived in small pockets, untouched by drought. These uplands became sanctuaries, islands of green when the plains below withered into dust. Migration, then, was not just about distance. It was about finding micro-worlds within the vast hostile expanse, refuges of stability hidden within the turbulence. And so, slowly, step by step, humanity spread. Early waves of migration carried small groups out of Africa into the Middle East and beyond. Many of these first journeys ended in failure. Populations that reached too far too fast, only to find themselves cut off, isolated, extinguished. But failure did not erase the pattern. Again and again, as climates shifted, new groups attempted the journey, and each time they learned a little more. A river crossing here, a mountain pass there. The landscape itself became a teacher, one step at a time. The rhythm of migration was the rhythm of survival. Nights spent under white skies, where stars glittered in patterns still familiar to us, constellations that guided their steps though they did not yet have names. Days spent under harsh suns, sweat streaking their skin, muscles aching with the weight of distance. Children grew up walking, their first memories shaped by trails, by rivers crossed, by the feel of their mother's hand tugging them forward. Migration also reshaped what it meant to be human. To move required cooperation. One carried the child, another carried fire. One tracked the herds, another searched for roots. Stories were told along the way, soft words spoken by firelight, tales of rivers and mountains that became landmarks not only in geography but in memory. Migration wove identity, gave groups a shared history of motion, of endurance. Even today, scientists trace the echoes of these journeys in our very genes. Patterns of genetic diversity reveal the pathways, the bottlenecks, the expansions, the moments when small groups split from others and wandered into new lands. Archaeological sites show tools scattered along ancient roads, each flake of stone a marker of movement. From Africa into the Levant, from the Levant into Asia, from Asia into Europe, humanity moved like rivers branching outward, sometimes pooling, sometimes drying, but always seeking. But these were not migrations of endless triumph. Each path carried risk. To move meant to step into the unknown, where predators lurked in forests, where rival groups might guard territories with violence, where climates could shift again and turn refuge into ruin. A journey that began with hope could end with starvation. One drought too long, one hunt too poor, and a lineage ended, and yet others survived, carrying the story forward. Close your eyes and imagine a horizon of mountains, their peaks dusted in snow. A group of humans, no more than 30 souls, winds its way upward along a rocky pass. Their breaths plume white in the cold, their furs stiff with frost, their fingers tight around wooden spears. The sound of their footsteps echoes between stone walls, mingling with the distant call of a bird. They do not know what waits on the other side, but they move anyway, because to stop is to vanish. Over time, these migrations instilled something profound in us, the instinct to wander. It is why, even today, we are drawn to horizons, to roads, to seas. Movement became survival so deeply that it became identity. Staying still felt like danger. Wandering felt like life. And so, even after the bottleneck eased, even after survival became less precarious, the habit of movement remained. It is written in our bones, in our restlessness, in our desire to explore. Migration was humanity's test, but also its teacher. It taught adaptability, because every new land required new strategies. It taught resilience, because not every journey succeeded. It taught connection, because survival meant traveling not alone, but together. And slowly it expanded our reach, until a species, once trapped in small refuges, was walking across continents, carrying with them fire, tools, language, and memory. So when we think of migration, we must not imagine vast armies or heroic conquests. We must imagine families with children in their arms, embers in their hands, stories on their lips, walking into the unknown, quiet footsteps carrying forward the fragile thread of existence. Migration was not just survival, it was becoming, and perhaps that is why the instinct to wander remains with us still, why oceans call, why roads beckon, why horizons pull at us. Because once, long ago, movement was not a luxury. It was the only way the story continued. There are winters that last for a season, when frost whitens the land and rivers lock under ice, only to thaw again with spring. And then there are winters of another kind, not measured in months, but in centuries, winters of the spirit, winters of existence, when survival becomes the only rhythm of life. For nearly 200,000 years, Our ancestors lived in such a winter. The long bottleneck was not a storm that came and went, but an age of hardship that pressed down like endless snow, shaping humanity into something stronger, something tempered by struggle. Picture it, a valley at dusk, wind sweeping low and bitter, the grass brittle underfoot. Families gather close around a fire, their furs stiff with frost, their breath clouding in the frigid air. The fire sputters, its warmth fragile against the cold that stretches forever outward. Beyond the glow lies a world indifferent to their survival. Predators pacing in the dark, rivers sealed under ice, herds vanished into scarcity. This was not a temporary trial. It was life itself, generation after generation, born into hunger, raised in danger, aged into fatigue, and buried in the earth with only the faint hope that the children might continue. Entire lifetimes may have passed without what we would call progress. Stone tools changed slowly. Fires burned in much the same way. A child grew, learned to hunt, gathered roots, told stories, had children of their own, and the world remained as harsh, as merciless as it had been for the parents. For them, survival was not a struggle to overcome, but the permanent condition of existence. To wake was to endure. To sleep was to hope to wake again. And yet, within this endless winter, small seeds of transformation were sown, skills sharpened through necessity, traditions deepened through memory, resilience became as natural as breath. The long winter did not break humanity, it forged it. The sensory world of this age was stark, the sky often grey, heavy with low clouds, the air thin, sharp in the lungs, the sound of silence overwhelming, broken only by the crackle of fire, the call of scavenging birds, the low growl of predators circling unseen. The taste of food, when food was found, was always edged with desperation. Bitter roots softened in smoke, marrow sucked from cracked bones, shellfish salty against the tongue. The texture of life itself was rough and raw, like stone against skin. In this crucible, patience became survival. A hunter could wait for hours, still as stone, for prey that might never appear. A gatherer might search all day for roots that yielded only a handful. Mothers and fathers watched children grow weak with hunger, clinging to life with nothing but hope and care. The long winter taught that endurance was not a single act, but a way of being. But humanity was not only enduring. Beneath the weight of hardship, something invisible was forming. Cooperation grew deeper. Families became bands. Bands became communities. Trust and reliance on one another became as necessary as food. A lone human could not survive the long winter, but together, sharing fire, dividing food, passing knowledge, they endured. Imagine a storm sweeping across a plain, snow driving into the air, visibility shrinking to nothing. In a shallow cave, 30 humans gather, huddled shoulder to shoulder. The sound of the wind is a constant howl, the cold creeping inward, but within the circle warmth remains. The fire flickers, fed by careful hands. Stories are told, not for entertainment, but for survival. Reminders of where the herds return, of which plants can still be eaten, of how ancestors survived storms before. Children listen, their eyes wide in firelight, their bodies wrapped in the shared warmth of the group. This is what carried humanity forward, not strength alone, but the weaving of lives into something larger. The long winter also shaped imagination. In the endless repetition of struggle, minds wandered. Shadows cast by firelight became animals on the cave wall. Patterns in the stars overhead became guides for direction, omens for hunting, memories of ancestors. Hardship carved space for creativity, not as escape, but as survival. To imagine was to plan, to remember was to prepare, to tell stories was to hold on to knowledge. Even grief became part of this shaping. Death was constant, infants lost, hunters taken by predators, elders fading into silence. Yet grief was not only loss, it was memory, it was ritual. It was the acknowledgement that life had meaning beyond survival. Burials with pigment, bodies placed with care, objects left with the dead. These acts whispered of belief, of continuity, of a sense that even in a world of hardship, humanity was more than hunger and cold. Over generations, these practices grew into culture, and culture became survival. It was not just the crack of stone-shaping tools, but the teaching of how to strike. Not just the finding of roots, but the sharing of where to dig. Knowledge accumulated like embers banked in ash, small, glowing, waiting for the moment to flare brighter. And though progress was slow, though entire lifetimes passed with little visible change, the weight of these accumulated sparks was immense. The long winter also carved humility into the species. To live at the mercy of climate, prey, disease, and famine was to recognize that humans were not masters, but participants in the vast, indifferent rhythms of nature. The sound of wolves howling in the distance, the sight of ice creeping further down the valley, the feel of hunger gnawing at the belly. These were reminders that the earth gave no guarantees. To survive, humanity had to listen, adapt, and bend like grass before the wind. And yet within this humility lay strength, because to bend is not to break, to adapt is not to surrender. The humans of the Bottleneck were tempered like metal in fire, beaten down, reshaped, and made stronger through the repetition of suffering. Imagine the dawn breaking after a night of bitter cold. The horizon glows faintly pink, the frost sparkling on grass. Breath clouds in the air as hunters rise, stretch, and step into the morning. Their tools are simple, their bodies thin, but their eyes are steady. They will walk, they will track, they will endure. The long winter has stripped away everything but persistence, and in that persistence the seeds of the future are carried. This era, which to us seems endless and bleak, was the foundation on which everything else was built. Without the long winter, there would be no art, no agriculture, no cities, no science, because without endurance, without patience, without the ability to survive centuries of hardship, humanity would have vanished. The long winter was not only a test, it was the shaping ground of what it meant to be human. Close your eyes and listen. The crackle of fire, the murmur of voices, the distant cry of wind. This is the sound of survival stretched across 200,000 years. A winter so long it felt eternal, and yet within it humanity was being forged, shaped into a species that could endure not only the cold and the hunger, but the endless uncertainties of a world always shifting, always testing. The long winter of humanity was not an absence of life. It was life in its rawest form. It was the crucible in which resilience, cooperation, memory, and imagination fused together. And from that fusion, the human spirit emerged, scarred but unbroken, ready at last for what would come next. Picture the human story as a vast river. In its beginning, countless streams of possibility feed into it. Different lineages, different traits, different futures. But in the age of the Bottleneck, that river narrowed to a trickle. Its waters squeezed through a canyon so tight that much of what once flowed was left behind on the banks. What emerged on the other side was not only smaller, but different. We did not carry forward all the variety we might have. Instead, we carried the fragments that chance allowed, traits that survived not because they were stronger, but simply because they happened to be present in those few who endured. This is the strange poetry of genetic drift. Unlike natural selection, where the strong survive through adaptation, drift is the rule of chance. Imagine tossing pebbles into a stream. Some are swept forward, others sink and vanish, not because one was better than the other, but because of where they landed, how the current caught them. For humanity, the bottleneck was such a stream. The traits of those few who endured became the traits of us all. Close your eyes and imagine a firelit cave. Around it sit perhaps 30 people, mothers, fathers, children, elders. In their faces you see echoes of us, the curve of a nose, the shape of a brow, the color of their eyes reflecting the flames. If they happen to be brown-eyed, then generations after them would carry brown eyes too. If they carried a particular immune defense, that defense would ripple through millennia into billions of descendants. Our uniqueness today, paradoxically, comes from the loss of diversity. The narrowing of the funnel gave humanity a strange kind of unity. Compared to chimpanzees and gorillas, our genetic variation is astonishingly low. Two chimpanzees from different parts of Africa may differ more genetically than any two humans chosen at random from anywhere on Earth. This is the scar of the bottleneck, a reminder that we are all descended from a small handful who carried us through. The world may feel vast, but within us the genome whispers, "You are all closer than you think." And yet, within this closeness lies the story of uniqueness, because drift did not just reduce, it sculpted. Certain features became widespread, not because they were the fittest, but because they were present in the survivors. Imagine eye colors, once diverse, narrowed into fewer shades. Imagine skin tones, adapting not purely by advantage, but by chance survival. Imagine immune systems carrying quirks that spread, not because they were perfect, but because they existed in the right people at the right time. Humanity was not streamlined into an ideal form. We were molded by the roll of invisible dice. The sensory world of the shaping is almost imperceptible, but it lingers. The warmth of sun on skin, how some absorbed it differently, how some retained protection against its burn. The sound of a cough in the night, how some carried defenses within their blood that others did not. The sight of eyes catching the glow of fire, their color hinting at genetic quirks long carried forward. These details, ordinary to us now, are the legacy of drift, a reminder that what feels natural is often an accident of history. Genetic drift also created a fragile kind of unity. Unlike other primates, divided into deeply distinct populations, humanity emerged as a single lineage. Imagine the Earth of that time, small bands scattered, separated by rivers, deserts, and ice. Each group was fragile, each could have vanished, but somehow enough of them endured and reconnected. The result was not a splintering of species, but a convergence. Humanity became one. Fragile, yes, but united in a way that would one day allow us to spread across the entire globe. This unity carried both blessings and risks. On the one hand, it meant that when humanity expanded, it expanded as a single species, able to interconnect, to share, to blend ideas and genes across vast distances. On the other hand, it meant that vulnerabilities, too, were shared. A disease could sweep more easily through populations with less genetic variety. A weakness in immunity, once rare, could become widespread. Our closeness made us strong in some ways, but it also tethered us to collective risks. Still, within that narrowness lay potential. A species more diverse might have fractured, split into separate lineages, as Neanderthals and Denisovans did. We did not. Perhaps by chance, perhaps by necessity, we emerged as one. And in that unity, was the seed of something powerful, the ability to face the world not as fragments, but as a collective whole. Imagine again the river of humanity, flowing narrow but steady. Within its waters, carried forward by chance, are the traits that define us: a slight curve of the skull, a quirk in the blood, a resistance to one disease, a susceptibility to another, all of it woven into the current, all of it drawn from the same few who endured. Each of us today carries within us echoes of that narrowing, a fingerprint of survival not earned but bestowed. There is something humbling in this, to know that much of who we are, from the way our bodies respond to the sun, to the shape of our immune systems, is not the result of superiority, but of survival's lottery, that our uniqueness is not a crown of perfection, but a scar of fragility. And yet, from that scar, something immense has grown. Think of the feel of wind across the savannah, carrying scents of dry grass and distant rain. Those who could endure its dryness, whose bodies carried small quirks of resilience, passed their line forward. Think of the sound of a predator's roar at night, those who survived the encounter, not by strength alone but by chance, left descendants who would carry fragments of their survival into the future. Each detail of life in the bottleneck etched itself into the genome, not deliberately but inevitably, and now standing under the modern sky every sunrise spilling gold across oceans and mountains, we are the inheritors of those chance survivals. 8 billion people, each carrying within their cells the story of drift, of narrowing, of fragile endurance. We are diverse in culture, in language, in appearance. Yet beneath that surface our DNA whispers sameness, a unity born from survival through near erasure. Perhaps this is why humanity feels both varied and singular, why we can look at one another across vast distances and still recognize ourselves, why a smile in one land mirrors a smile in another, why music, though different in sound, carries the same pulse. Beneath the layers of difference we are bound by the bottleneck, by drift, by the strange unity forged in the crucible of chance. The long winter of existence did not only shape resilience and cooperation, it sculpted us genetically, fixing traits, narrowing diversity, and leaving us fragile but unified. We emerged from that canyon of survival, not perfect, not destined, but unique in a way no other primate has been. And that uniqueness became our strength, not because it was chosen, but because it was carried forward, written into us by the quiet hand of chance. The story of humanity is not only told in blood and breath, but also in silence. For the age of the bottleneck, the silence in the ground speaks as loudly as the bones that remain. The earth keeps memory in fragments, a tooth buried in clay, a skull split by time, a stone flake sharpened by a forgotten hand. Yet when we turn to the mid-Pleistocene, when our ancestors were pressed to their narrowest survival, the record becomes faint, as though the earth itself hesitated to remember us. Few fossils survive from the span between 900,000 and 800,000 years ago. An emptiness stretches across that time, an absence that confirms what DNA whispers, that humanity was rare, scattered, fragile. The ground does not lie. The silence of its layers is evidence enough. Where once there should be abundance, there are only gaps, voids, where our presence should have been etched. Imagine walking across a dry riverbed. The stones crunch beneath your feet, the wind carries dust into your hair. You search the ground for signs of life, for bones bleached by sun, or tools hidden in soil. Hours pass and the emptiness deepens. Nothing remains. This is how the fossil record of the bottleneck feels. Long stretches where humans should have been, but were not in numbers large enough to leave a trace. and then suddenly a fragment emerges, a skull cap, weathered and brittle, lifted from sediment by cautious hands. The curve of its bones speaks of a human who lived when survival was measured day by day. Or a stone tool, sharp edges still intact, rests where it was dropped a lifetime ago. These finds are rare, precious. They remind us that though our presence was faint, it was not absent. There were still fires burning, still hands shaping stone, still lives carried forward through hunger and danger. The fossil record is not just bones. It is absence and presence, a pattern of silence broken by fragile whispers. The gaps themselves are the story, evidence that our numbers were small, that our range was thin, that humanity was nearly erased. To walk through that silence is to understand how close we came to vanishing into the earth forever, leaving no trace but a few broken stones. Yet even in this scarcity, the fragments we do find hold immense meaning. A jawbone from the hills of Ethiopia, its teeth worn down by a lifetime of tough roots and fibrous plants. A skull fragment from Spain, its ridges carrying both strength and fragility. These fossils are not just remains. They are echoes of endurance, voices carried forward by bone. They tell us that someone lived, someone suffered, someone survived long enough to leave a trace in stone and earth. Close your eyes and picture the excavation of such a find. The air is dry, carrying the scent of dust and clay. A brush sweeps gently across soil. The sound of bristles faint against grit. Slowly the curve of bone emerges. The color is pale, blending into the earth, fragile as parchment. To touch it is to touch time itself, a bridge across nearly 1,000,000 years, a reminder that a life once burned here, a fire once flickered, a voice once spoke. Stone tools, too, remain as witnesses, flakes chipped from cores, their edges sharp as if the maker had only just set them down. Some lie clustered, evidence of a small gathering, perhaps a family shaping tools together by the riverside, their laughter mingling with the sound of water. Others lie isolated, dropped along a journey, left behind as their maker walked onward into uncertainty. Each flake is a heartbeat in stone, a memory preserved in silence. What is striking about these finds is not their abundance but their rarity. For long ages there is little to discover, as though the earth herself hesitates to reveal us. This is the mark of the bottleneck, not absence, but near absence, a thin thread of humanity stretched so fine that it barely left a trace upon the world. The silence in the record is haunting. It reminds us that we were once so few that the earth could nearly forget us, that an accident of history, a drought too long, a predator too swift, could have ended us with no one left to remember. And yet, those few who endured did leave traces. They carved their survival into stone, into bone, into the very landscape. Small, fragile, but enough. There is a kind of poetry in this scarcity. Each fossil becomes more than evidence. It becomes a monument to survival. A fragment of skull is not just bone. It is the memory of a life carried through hunger and fear, the story of someone who endured when endurance seemed impossible. A flake of stone is not just a tool. It is the echo of hands, of firelight, of survival pressed into form. Imagine standing in a cave where such artifacts were found. The air is cool, damp with the scent of stone. Light filters in from the entrance, illuminating walls scarred by time. In your hand, you hold a shard of flint, its edge sharp against your finger. You feel the pressure ridges where it was struck, the skill in its shaping. In that moment, the distance of nearly 1,000,000 years collapses. You hold not just stone, but memory. The fossil record of the bottleneck is sparse because humanity was sparse, but within its silence lies proof of fragility and resilience, proof that we nearly disappeared, proof that we did not. Archaeology is a conversation with silence. It listens to what is missing as much as to what is found. And in the long silence of the bottleneck, the whispers that remain, a bone here, a tool there, are reminders of how close we came to being nothing more than a forgotten branch. They remind us that survival was never certain, that our existence today rests on the thin edge of chance, carried forward by a few who endured. So when you think of the fossil record, do not imagine abundance, imagine silence. Imagine vast stretches of time where humanity left barely a trace. Imagine the emptiness that confirms our fragility, and then imagine the precious fragments that break that silence, each one a voice whispering across ages, "We were here, we endured, and because of us you are here too." There comes a moment in every long winter when the ice begins to loosen its grip, when the rivers stir again beneath their frozen skin, and when the air softens with the scent of thaw. For humanity that moment arrived around 800,000 years ago. After nearly 200 millennia of near erasure, of silence and scarcity, the earth began to shift. The glaciers, vast and heavy, drew back their long shadows. Rain returned to parched valleys, falling in rhythms that nourished plants and drew animals back to familiar trails. The air, though still cold, carried renewal, and with it our ancestors found room to breathe, to grow, to step cautiously out of the bottleneck that had held them so tightly. Picture the earth then, not the world we know, mapped and divided, but one immense expanse of shifting ecosystems. Forests slowly spread where once there had been only bare ground. Rivers thickened, their banks greening with reeds. The wind carried new scents, blossoms, damp earth, the musk of returning herds. For our ancestors, the world must have seemed to stir awake, a long-sleeping giant opening its eyes. Where once silence dominated, now the land pulsed again with life, and yet the return of abundance did not erase the scars of scarcity. The humans who stepped into this new age were not the same as those who had begun the long winter. They were forged by hardship, their instincts sharpened, their habits carved deep by centuries of endurance. Expansion resumed. Yes, families multiplied, bands grew larger, migrations stretched further. But every step forward carried caution, as if memory itself whispered, "Remember how close we came to vanishing." The sensory world of recovery was profound. Imagine the sound of birdsong returning to valleys, where only wind had echoed. The feel of damp soil between fingers, as roots and tubers were pulled once more from the ground. The sight of herds moving again across horizons, their silhouettes black against golden light. These were not merely changes in landscape, they were changes in possibility. For the first time in ages, life offered more than endurance. It offered potential. Still, this was not a sudden flowering. The bottleneck did not vanish overnight. Populations grew slowly, like embers fanned carefully into flame. A band of 30 might become 50. 50 might become 100 across generations. Each birth was a victory, each child a sign that the narrow thread was widening. The rhythm of scarcity had trained our ancestors to be careful, deliberate, and patient. That patience, carried forward, became the foundation of survival in a more forgiving world. Consider a scene along a newly replenished river. The air is humid, buzzing with insects. A group kneels along the bank, their hands dipping into cool water, filling gourds carved from shells and clay. Fish flash silver in the shallows. Children laugh, splashing, their voices ringing bright where once silence had hung heavy. Nearby, hunters return with small game, the smell of meat mingling with damp reeds. There is joy, yes, but also a quiet reverence, For those who lived through centuries of absence, abundance was not taken lightly. It was gift and memory entwined, but survival was not only physical. The narrow escape shaped the human mind. It deepened memory, sharpened foresight, and wove resilience into identity. Those who had endured the long winter taught their children not only how to hunt and gather, but how to prepare, how to adapt, how to expect change. This inheritance of caution became cultural. Rituals of gratitude, stories of famine, songs of endurance, these were not luxuries but anchors, reminders of fragility. They taught that abundance could vanish, that survival depended on vigilance. The narrow escape also bound humanity together. When populations are small, every connection matters. Bonds between families, alliances between bands, sharing of knowledge across groups, these became the glue that held us from falling back into extinction. And as ecosystems recovered, these bonds expanded outward, allowing humans to spread further, to explore new territories, to encounter challenges with networks stronger than before. The fragility of the past had taught unity, and unity became strength. Even in this renewal, danger remained. Predators still prowled the forests, climate shifts still threatened, volcanoes could still darken skies, droughts could still shrivel crops. Yet the humans who faced these trials now carried lessons etched into their very being. They had learned to adapt, to move, to innovate under pressure. They had learned that survival was not about overpowering nature, but about flowing with it, bending and shifting like grass in the wind. Close your eyes and imagine the dawn of this new chapter. The sun rises over a horizon, washed clean by rain, the sky streaked with pink and gold. Mist clings to the valleys, carrying the smell of wet stone and fresh growth. A group emerges from a cave where they have sheltered for generations. They look upon a world greener than any they remember. Their steps are tentative, their breath steady. This is not triumphal conquest. It is cautious renewal, the first steps into a future that feels uncertain but possible. The narrow escape defined humanity in ways we still carry. It left us both fragile and resilient, cautious yet ambitious. It gave us memory, not of individual lives, but of deep time, carried in genes and culture alike. We learned to expect change, to survive it, to endure not as individuals, but as a species bound together. It also gave us humility, to know that survival was not guaranteed, that we had walked the edge of erasure for so long tempered arrogance. The humans of this era could not imagine dominion over Earth. They could only imagine survival within it, and yet that humility prepared us for endurance greater than any single environment. It gave us the flexibility to inhabit deserts, forests, mountains, and coasts, to carry the fire forward into every corner of the globe. Perhaps this is why our myths, even today, carry echoes of narrow escape, stories of floods survived, of fires endured, of rebirth after catastrophe. Somewhere deep within us lingers the memory that we should not be here, that our presence is improbable, that we are the children of chance and fragility. And so we tell stories not of endless triumph, but of disaster narrowly avoided, of survival pulled from the jaws of loss. In the end, the bottleneck did not erase us. It defined us. It took a species teetering on the edge and taught it endurance, caution, unity, and imagination. The narrow escape was not simply survival. It was transformation. The humans who emerged around 800,000 years ago were not the same as those who had entered the bottleneck. They carried scars, yes, but also strength. They carried fragility, yes, but also resilience. And so, step by step, generation by generation, The long winter of near erasure gave way to a slow, careful spring. Humanity expanded, grew, and began to shape a destiny not of abundance alone, but of adaptation. The narrow escape was not a moment of victory. It was a long exhale after centuries of holding breath. It was the beginning of a story that would carry forward into all the futures yet to come. When humanity finally stepped out of the bottleneck's grip, we did not leave it behind. We carried it with us, not only in our DNA, but in our minds, in our cultures, in the way we remember and the way we fear. The scars of survival etched themselves deeper than bones. They shaped the very way we see the world. The instincts that whisper in the back of our thoughts, the stories we tell when firelight flickers and silence draws close. The bottleneck was not simply endured, it was absorbed into our nature. Close your eyes and imagine the weight of constant danger. Every sound in the night, the snap of a twig, the growl of an animal, the whistle of wind through trees, could mean death. Every dry season could stretch too long. Every illness could take away a child. To live in such fragility for generation after generation was to live in awareness of loss. Our ancestors were not dreamers of endless abundance. They were guardians of scarcity, navigators of risk. From them we inherited a mind attuned to caution. Even today, with fields full of crops and stores full of food, our bodies tighten at the thought of famine. Our hearts race at the whisper of disaster. It is the echo of ancient fear. But from that fear also came innovation. Scarcity made problem solvers of us. In a world where nothing could be wasted, humans learned to stretch, to transform, to imagine tools where none existed before. A broken bone became a scraper, a shell became a vessel. Fire became not just warmth, but chemistry, unlocking nutrients, hardening wood, reshaping stone. Each trial of scarcity was answered with invention, and invention became tradition. We carry this restlessness still, this drive to create, to solve, to prepare for problems we do not yet face. The bottleneck taught us to be wary, but also to be inventive. The psychological legacy of those years is written most clearly in our stories. Imagine again the circle of firelight. Shadows dance across cave walls. Faces glow in the shifting flame. A voice rises, telling of a flood that drowned the valleys, of fire that scorched the hills, of darkness that swallowed the sun. These myths are not inventions of fantasy alone. They are cultural shadows, memories of bottleneck life passed down in symbolic form. Floods, fires, endings. These themes return across continents, across cultures, separated by oceans and ages, yet strangely familiar to all. They are humanity's deep memory of near erasure, retold until they became part of identity. Even today, we remain obsessed with apocalypse. From ancient flood myths to modern stories of collapse, we dream again and again of endings, of the world swept away by fire, drowned by water, frozen in ice. Why this fixation? Perhaps because deep within us is the knowledge that we survived such endings before. The bottleneck conditioned us not only to endure catastrophe, but to expect it. Our cultural imagination has been shaped by the long winter of survival, and even in abundance we cannot forget. The legacy is also one of cooperation. Alone, a human could not endure 200 millennia of scarcity. It was only in groups, families bound together, bands united by trust, that survival was possible. That necessity carved into us an instinct for belonging. The warmth of others became safety. The voice of another became guidance. To be cut off from the group was to risk death. That is why even now loneliness strikes as sharply as hunger, and rejection wounds as deeply as injury. We were shaped to need one another, to share fire and food, to trade words and comfort, to be part of something larger than ourselves. Consider the tactile details of such cooperation. The feel of another's hand steadying you as you climb over rock. The sound of voices blending in song to soothe a child. The shared rhythm of pounding roots into paste, of skinning hides together, of lifting stones to build a windbreak. These acts were survival disguised as community. In them was written the human instinct for solidarity, for caring, for weaving bonds that made fragile existence less brittle. That instinct remains our legacy. The scars of the bottleneck also left us with a strange relationship to abundance. After centuries of scarcity, abundance feels unnatural, even dangerous. When food is plentiful, we hoard. When resources are secure, we still imagine loss. Our bodies store fat with eagerness, remembering famine. Our cultures build granaries, vaults, savings, remembering absence. Even in times of plenty, we prepare for the long winter to return. This preparation is not irrational. It is survival written across centuries. The legacy of hunger is stored in every instinct to save, to plan, to cling to what we have. At the same time, the bottleneck gave us a sharpened sense of imagination. To survive so long in fragility required not only tools but foresight. It required minds that could anticipate, picture futures, rehearse possibilities. Out of this grew not just problem-solving, but storytelling, art, ritual. The ability to imagine what is not yet real, to see the herd beyond the horizon, the storm before it arrives, the danger before it strikes, became the most important survival tool of all. We live still in that imagination. We build futures in our minds before they exist. We dream of places unseen. We fear disasters that have not yet come. This is not weakness, it is legacy. The bottleneck also left a mark on our sense of identity. In a world of near extinction, every life mattered, every birth was a celebration, every death a catastrophe. That weight gave humans an understanding of value deeper than survival alone. To lose a member was not only to lose a person, but to risk the group. Grief became memory. Memory became ritual. Ritual became culture, and culture became identity. The recognition that we are more than individuals, that we are threads in a fragile weave. Close your eyes and imagine the sensory details of that identity. The smooth feel of a carved pendant, passed from parent to child, a reminder of belonging. The sound of chants rising in unison, voices carrying across night air. The taste of food shared in scarcity, each bite measured, each portion given as both sustenance and symbol. These small acts of meaning carried survival forward. They are the roots of what we now call humanity's uniqueness, the blending of survival with memory, of existence with meaning. Even our modern fears reflect this inheritance. We fear not just death, but extinction. Not just hunger, but collapse. Not just conflict, but endings. Our fascination with the fragile, with endangered species, with vanishing forests, with melting ice, echoes the awareness that we ourselves nearly vanished. We look outward with caution because we carry inward the memory of fragility. The bottleneck was our crucible, and its lessons still shape our collective psyche. And yet, the legacy of survival is not only fear, it is also awe. To know how close we came to erasure makes every sunrise luminous, every horizon immense. To stand beneath the stars and know that our ancestors once looked upon them with hunger in their bellies and hope in their hearts is to feel both humility and wonder. Survival was not inevitable, and yet here we are. That improbability is itself a kind of miracle, a legacy of endurance that colors every breath we take. So when we tell stories of endings, when we prepare for scarcity, when we cling to one another in times of fear, we are not simply reacting to the present. We are reaching back across time, answering the echoes of ancestors who lived through catastrophe, who survived by caution, cooperation, and imagination. Their legacy flows in us still, in our genes, in our instincts, in our stories. The bottleneck nearly erased us, but in not erasing us, it shaped us. It gave us fragility, but also resilience. It gave us fear, but also foresight. It gave us scarcity, but also creativity. And in the balance of those opposites, humanity emerged not only as survivors, but as storytellers, carriers of memory, seekers of meaning, builders of futures. That is the legacy of survival. The question lingers like an echo in deep valleys. Why us? Why did our lineage survive when so many others, Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, and countless unnamed cousins, faded into silence? The bottleneck should have ended us. The long winter of scarcity should have thinned our thread until it snapped. And yet here we are, carriers of their shadows, survivors of a narrowing so sharp it nearly erased us. To ask why we endured is to peer into the heart of chance and resilience, into the delicate balance of adaptation and fortune. Perhaps it began with adaptability. Our ancestors were not specialists like the saber-toothed cats who relied on great herds of prey, nor like the giant bears who thrived only in certain climates. We were generalists, restless omnivores who could shift diets as the world changed. When the herds moved away, we cracked bones for marrow. When plants withered, we dug for roots. Along rocky shores, we learned to harvest shellfish, their briny taste lingering on tongues in the salt air. Insects, tubers, fish, birds, each became survival, each became nourishment. The variety of flavors, bitter roots, smoky roasted meat, sharp salt of clams, was the palate of desperation, but also the proof of adaptability. We were also wanderers. When droughts came, we moved. When glaciers advanced, we withdrew to valleys where warmth still clung. The air of those migrations carried many scents, the dry heat of deserts, the sharp cold of winds over ice, the wet musk of tropical forests. To keep walking, to keep seeking, was to survive. Those who stayed too long in one place often perished with it. Movement was not ambition, it was lifeline, and slowly by following rivers, coasts, and animal trails, humanity spread further than our cousins, always pressing outward into landscapes both hostile and promising. But adaptability alone does not explain endurance. Other species could adjust in small ways, and still they fell. What set us apart was imagination, the ability to see beyond the present moment, to shape possibilities before they existed. In firelight, our ancestors carved tools not only for today's hunt, but for tomorrow's. They imagined the path of prey, the rhythm of seasons, the danger of predators. This foresight, the mind's ability to hold futures, became our invisible armor. The sound of stone flaking against stone was not just craft, but imagination at work, the rhythm of survival echoing in each strike. Cooperation, too, played its part. In fragile populations, each death carried weight. To endure, humans learned to lean on one another, to share food, to guard fires, to raise children together. The sight of hands passing food across a circle, the warmth of shoulders pressed close on cold nights, the steady murmur of voices teaching children how to survive. These were not luxuries. They were strategies of survival. No other species, not even our closest cousins, seemed to build bonds as deep, as wide, as enduring. We became a species defined by trust, by networks, by the simple truth that survival is stronger when shared. And yet, even these qualities, adaptability, imagination, cooperation, might not have been enough without luck. Perhaps a band of survivors found a refuge with just enough water, just enough game, just enough safety from predators to endure the worst centuries. Perhaps a volcanic eruption missed one valley but smothered another. Perhaps a drought ended 1 year too late for others, but just in time for us. Luck, in the form of geography, climate, timing, played as much a role as any skill. We are here not only because of what we did, but because of where we happened to be when the storms came. The bottleneck did not break us, it tempered us, like stone flaked into sharper edges, like fire forged into brighter flame. Humanity emerged stronger for having been reduced. We became cautious yet inventive, fragile yet resilient. Every trait we now call human, our restless curiosity, our storytelling, our ability to imagine futures and share them, was sharpened in that crucible. The narrowness of survival pressed us into unity, into a lineage less divided than our primate cousins. We became one species, bound not only by blood but by memory of fragility. Imagine us standing on a ridge as the bottleneck loosened. The air is cool, carrying the damp scent of recovering forests. Below, herds move once more across plains, their hoofbeats like distant drums. A group of humans watches them, tools in hand, fire waiting nearby. They do not know the word survivors, but they feel its truth in every heartbeat. Behind them lies 200,000 years of hunger, fear, and narrow escapes. Ahead of them lies possibility. They step forward not in triumph, but in quiet resilience, the kind born only of generations who refused to vanish. Why we endured may never be answered in certainty. It was not one thing, but many: adaptability, imagination, cooperation, chance. Together they wove a net strong enough to catch us as we fell again and again toward extinction. And in that net was carried a new story, the rise of Homo sapiens, fewer in number but stronger in spirit, poised to wander, not only valleys and coasts but entire continents. The bottleneck did not end our story. It began it anew. From near extinction, from silence almost complete, a voice rose. That voice became humanity, carrying forward the lessons of fragility, the habits of resilience, and the restless drive to endure. The question of why may never find one answer, but the proof of survival lies all around us, in the bones of ancestors, in the firelight of imagination, in the bonds we still weave, and in the fact that we are here at all. We endured because we were shaped to endure, and from that endurance a new chapter unfolded, one that would spread across the globe, carving stories into mountains, rivers, and skies. The rise of humanity was not inevitable. It was improbable, fragile, precious, and that is what makes it wondrous. The earth still holds the memory of that long trial. In the quiet of caves, in the faint etchings of stone tools, in the fragile strands of our DNA, the story waits, whispering of a time when the world nearly forgot us. It was not written in grand monuments or abundant remains, but in silence, in absence, in the sheer improbability of survival. That we exist at all is proof that fragility and strength can live side by side, that chance and resilience can weave together into endurance. Every breath we take carries the echo of that age. Every voice that rises in laughter, every hand that reaches for another, is tethered to lives lived in hunger, in fear, and in hope. Our ancestors did not endure for glory, they endured for tomorrow, for the child born under an uncertain sky, for the fire that must not be allowed to die, for the fragile continuity of life carried from one day into the next. Even now we live with the shadows, our instinct to gather, to prepare, to tell stories of endings and beginnings, all are threads spun from that narrow survival. We imagine collapse because collapse once nearly claimed us. We imagine renewal because renewal once saved us. We imagine futures because our ancestors could not afford to live only in the present. Their vigilance became our imagination, their endurance became our legacy. And so, when we look across the world today, at cities glowing under starlit skies, at languages spilling like rivers, at billions of lives moving in endless patterns, we are seeing the expansion of that fragile spark grown into a blaze. It is a reminder that from the edge of erasure can rise abundance, that survival itself can be the seed of wonder. The bottleneck was not only a test of endurance, it was a shaping of who we are, of what it means to be human, and in remembering it, we honor those few who held the thread against all odds, whose unnamed lives carried forward the story we continue to tell. Their struggle was quiet, unseen by history, but it was the most important story of all, the story of persistence. As you drift now into rest, imagine their firelight, imagine the low murmur of voices in the dark, the faint glow pushing back against endless night. That fire is still burning. It burns in you, in me, in all of us. A living ember passed through 200,000 years of near silence, still alive, still bright, still carrying us forward into the unknown.